Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to Searching for Dragons. I'm Snappy, and I'm joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Graham. How are you doing, Graham?
I'm fantastic. How are you?
So excited to be here. This is a long time coming episode. When we had first kind of sat down and we're talking about doing a podcast, this was one of the first people that you immediately brought up. And this was something that was interesting for me because I'm not like against modernity and modern art, but so much of it is not engaging with the kind of magical process that I'm interested in. And I really was excited about going to the past and showcasing artists and poets and people who are doing this kind of stuff that may have not been immediately on the surface. But Gast is a really interesting figure because they're an active magician. They are a fine artist, someone who has kind of rejected the capitalist corporate sort of art world that they had spent most of their life in and gone into this, into the Ardennes forest. They have engaged with this magical process, with the Saturnian magic in a deeply profound and interesting way. So how did you discover Gast, and what drew you to this work, and why did you choose him for your artist?
So, unsurprisingly, my journey into Gast Bouchet's work starts with Artaud. I discovered a book by Artaud, or on Artaud rather, by Jane Goodall, Artaud and the Gnostic Drama. And I found it on I looked it up and I found it on the Scarlet Imprint website. And then I thought, I wonder what other works they must be releasing. If they're releasing like Artaud and stuff, I'm interested to see the philosophy behind some of their other works. And Anarch at the time was, this was earlier this year in the spring, was the most recent publication. And I was immediately drawn to it by the shape of the book. It's a bit more irregular and the aesthetic of it. And then I read.
Can you show us the book since you have it, Graham?
I can. This is the book.
Wow.
This is Anarch.
It's really like an art portfolio book, more so than like fine literature book or like your standard grimoire that you usually see with this kind of thing.
Exactly. So that stood out to me, and the message that seemed to be behind the work based on the description of it really jumped out at me. And so I ordered it, and it ended up being one of the most enriching texts I've encountered, I would say, in my life.
Wow.
Yeah, it's
high praise.
Well, it really kindled a lust for mysticism and the need to utilize that to enrich my life a bit more. It's something that I had often considered, and then it went by the wayside as I accumulated more trauma and illness. And this really sparked my return to that path that I discovered with Artaud. And
I can do that. Like doing so much like prep for this and reading into Gast, one of the interesting things with him is this fixation upon personal pain and personal struggle, and equating that to the grand struggle of our current moment in our natural world, right? Like we're all kind of fundamentally aware of this decay that we're currently existing in, and this degradation and almost this ignoring of the problem, and so there's this deep thing with Gast about wrestling with this personal struggle and utilizing that in this truly transformative way that's universal at the same time,
Definitely, and it really spoke to me. And when we brought up the idea of this podcast, I said, "Oh my God, I would love to talk about this work."
Yeah. I also think like this, I love a lot of like modern occultism, especially like Scarlet Imprint. They have some incredible work, even on the Saturnian stuff, which I generally believe is really hard to find because a lot of it is, it's edgelordy and it's silly. And, they do have like Peter Mark Adams and his incredible work, Game of Saturn, as well as Hagia Sophia and other stuff, so there is stuff out there, but there's this current trend within, a lot of occult writing and in the occult world of just, I call it academic regurgitation. as a scholar of like religion and someone deeply interested in this, I try to go to the original sources, and I try to engage, especially with the Greek or with the Indian, because I have that ability. But oftentimes you'll spend, $100+ on one of these magical texts, and it's someone's, personal interpretation of ancient sources that I could go find anywhere, online for free, largely. Or, I want to engage within the original. I want to engage with it in its original context. And a lot of these books wind up becoming instruction manuals and, personal gnosis guides, which is okay, but it's not what I'm after, so I've kind of avoided a lot of this literature. So when you were like, oh, we got this guy's on Scarlet Imprint and he's a modern magician, I was kind of, oh, and he's in the Saturnian current. It's like, I had a certain expectation, and that was not met by any means. Like, this is very radically not that. Gast is very much an artist, philosopher who is creating art that's meant to challenge and transform. And he's really engaging with the concept of the dragon, which is at the heart of our show, right?
Definitely.
When we were first talking about this, you showed me, I guess let's go right into the presentation here. I put some stuff at the beginning. Oh, let me just switch this up. Yeah, here we go. So here he is. This is Gast Bouschet. To begin with, you sent me this really fascinating article that was it's like a conversation between Gast Bouschet and Frater Archer, two prominent occultists, artists, magicians, and authors, as well as it includes an amazing poem by Harper Feist at the end. And I highly recommend everyone read it, but I wanted to include some of Gast's quotes from this, and didn't want to take everything away from the article. You can find this article on goetia.com. I highly, highly recommend you read it. It really gets into the philosophy and the ideas of this work. And I wanted to talk about this because it goes into this concept of the dragon. And so this is what Bouschet has to say here. It says, "What is the black mass? What leaden sea holds nature captive? Down here where microbial war rages, down here where bacterial souls burn. The process of black chemical initiation begins with a series of steps backwards on the evolutionary scale, up to the birth of the first child, the first opening bud, the first nuclear fusion in stars, the first embryonic atoms, fighting to survive in the eternal anarchy of chaos. Only when we see the gaping wound of the underground burst open before our inner eye will we meet the blind dragon, who rules a realm that cannot be ruled. It is it who writhes in the spaces between life and death. It whose sacred poison initiates the fusion of opposites. It whose black flame ignites and fuels our sorceress heart." What do you think of that, Graham?
Moving.
I wanted to bring that up and I wanted to just show how deep he is involved into a lot of this mythopoetic framework that we often discuss on here. I usually use the lens of Orphism, to describe this. In this article, Frater Archer brings the Egyptian lens, where he talks about Mot and Apophis. But we see the exact same thing within the Orphic, which is you have the chaos gap, which is, that primordial chaos, that cosmic womb, the utter blackness from which all creation comes and bursts forth. And what arises out of this gap, out of this womb, is this chaos serpent. And in the Orphic, it is a combination of two forces. You have Chronos as time, unending time, and then you have Ananke on the feminine, the necessity. And these forces, their writhing causes the cosmic waters of this gap to warm. And out of the warmth of the rising waters comes the cosmic egg, which the serpent attacks and shatters, giving birth to the primordial person, that Phanes, who then, through the whispers of the serpent, destroys themselves. rips themselves apart to know the other, and begins this descent into matter, into the material. So I thought it was really wild that he's going all the way back to that primordial beginning, to that first being, the dragon that is both being and non-being. It's blind because he talks about how it has this duality. So if we go forward here, I'll continue. He says, what I call black alchemy is a practice that arises, pardon my grand eloquence, from both the collapse of the human empire and the decline of nature into a state of Negrido. I juxtapose this fall into decay with the personal struggles, with disease and chronic pain that may seem trivial by comparison, but are existentially challenging for those who experience them firsthand. Our alchemical art is not aimed at perfecting nature or attaining the godlike dominion over the earth that we have aspired to for millennia, but at penetrating the depths of materiality to find something new. It is a kind of reverse alchemy that transmutes the solidified gold of the human throne into the flowing blood of the black earth. By embracing the suffering of both planetary and human body, we enable ourselves to reshape the relationship with each other. On the horizons of future possibilities looms the mercurial glow of a new epoch with a reclaimed body that is as vulnerable as it is powerful in its humility before nature. That is so, to me, really profound and just a very powerful explanation and sort of understanding of this Saturnian current, of this going back into and facing and confronting this primordial other, and also just this engaging with this death and decay and understanding its process for transformation. To engage with the other is to be transformed by it. To go back into the depth and into the black, to die, is to be transformed. And there's a beauty in this breakdown, and there is potential for evolution and for transformation. And it's like in our cosmic moment, we feel this so profoundly. I've often talked about how I feel like our future has a couple of clear possibilities that I see coming, where we destroy ourselves by our personal, there's a strong possibility we destroy ourselves through our hubris, through our degradation of nature, through our refusal to engage with it, or through the creation of children, like our technology, and then our utter disregard for them. If we manage to create AI, we're going to enter into that Chronosian cycle almost certainly, where we will attempt to consume our children. And then we wonder, will the children rise up and consume us? Will we be brought low in the same way as Saturn? And I really love this kind of juxtaposition because often, we all know of the ascent. We all know of the classic rising of the holy mountain that you see within the myths of Dionysus and Rhea and Attis and Cybele, and this rising out of the primordial filth, the severing of the genitalia so that you can, strive to be greater, to rise that mountain that is Cybele, and then with her help, get placed among the stars, And Dionysus is that tree, that god of the tree that shows us the way to reassemble and reconstitute matter. So it's a similar, but it's an inversion upon this, It's like by going into the black, by going even deeper, we get to the same point, but it is through this inversion of it, because as I think we're all aware in our current reality, this Apollonian pursuit of gold, like he highlights here, this pursuit of that alchemical healing, it's somewhat become corrupted. It's almost like these great people of our current moment have reached the summit of the mountain and have stopped. They do not seek to move beyond the stars and return back to that cosmic chasm. They want to stay at the top, right, and embrace that gold. But this kind of hubris, this refusal to continue to change, is very detrimental, and I think it's a profound kind of evil, for lack of a better term, facing our current moment. And I don't know. I loved it. What do you think about it, Graham?
I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head pretty well.
I know I get a little wild about this story.
No, it's great because this is something I'm not as well versed in, so it helps hearing it from you. So,
So I'll just end with one last passage from this, and then you can take over, and and you can show us Anarch, and we can dig in. So the last passage here from the Goetia article: whether chaos is formless, or whether a dragon mother or demons live there, is a subject of debate in the magical and religious communities that deal with such questions. Although from a mystical point of view, there is much to be said for regarding it as emptiness, there are indeed many examples of some form of demonic presence being found in the pre-cosmic realm. Even in Taoism, which is careful not to define the origin and guiding principle of existence, exorcists resort to ritual meditation to identify with the pre-cosmic state in which they confront the demons believed to rise from the primordial source. Be that as it may, in a time marked by political and religious disillusionment and a general sense of endings, we would do well to take myth-making seriously and look for ways to deal with decay and disillusion, whether they are personal in nature or affect us all. And to me, this was really beautiful. This confrontation with the moment, the idea of creating a new mythology, of going back into that primordial past, but recreating it in the current moment, reimagining it, rather than taking what the ancients did. You are learning from the ancients and doing it in the now, in a very personal and profound way. And it's also that I love this, this idea of the chaos and this debate between being and non-being, between will and action, because it's something that's at the heart of all this mystery, and it's something that we can't fully know. And I fundamentally, in my experience in magic and meditation, I believe that it is fundamentally both. It is being and non-being. It is yes and no, right? As above, so below. It both has a will, and it's a natural. It's doing what it does naturally. It's like this grand paradox, and it's that absurdity of life that we're meant to contend with. Like, when we engage with something like the muse or the holy guardian angel, we're forced to confront this grand paradox. Do we have free will, or are we being guided? And I'd say both. And it's like fundamentally everything you do has been done, but you have to choose to do it in the now at the same time, and I wanted us to read that to understand where Gast is coming from, and also because he's engaging with the dragon, which is at the heart of our show. And when we talk about magicians as dragons, what we're really meaning are these people who fundamentally confront the other and engage in this alchemical process, who by engaging in the dragon and in almost by battling them, you have to take on the poison. You have to transmute the poison of the dragon, and you have to slay the dragon. But in this process, you are fundamentally transformed and become draconic. There is no engagement with the other that doesn't transform you. So he really fully symbolizes everything that we're looking for and what we're getting at, and he's very clear about it. So I absolutely loved it. Where a lot of the other magicians, you have to dig, like when we were talking about Madison Kawine, or with like Baudelaire, they're not expressly doing this, even though it is there. You have to search. Whereas Gast is like, no, this is my entire project. Here we go.
Very out in the open while still retaining his own personal secrets.
Exactly. Because he won't even tell you what he personally thinks, about this grand paradox, so I love that. So Graham, talk to us about Anarch. We've done all of this setup. Also, read us a little bit of Gast's bio so that the audience has a full understanding of who he is.
Yes, of course. So this is from his website. It says Gast Bouschet is a visual artist and occult philosopher. Since the 1980s, alone or in collaboration with Nadine Hilbert, he has created a complex body of work that challenges the fundamental principles underlying structure, visibility, and power. His work spans a wide range of media, including photography, sound, video, painting, sculpture, and writing. In recent years, Gast Bouschet has increasingly focused on what has been described as a primordial and uniquely blackened eco-sorcery that he practices away from the public eye in the Ardennes forest.
Beautiful.
So I thought it'd be fair just to use his own words to describe himself instead of supplanting. Yeah. So Anarch, to continue with the description from the website before talking about my own interpretation of it, Anarch is a profound work of sinister animism and sorcerer's practice, a unique account of the path taken towards the dark sacred in a lifetime of personal struggle and artistic creation. Bouschet discusses his techniques, practices, and meditations, and shares diary extracts, revealing the signs and sacrifices he receives and undergoes. Here is the true black alchemy of the soul Niger and the Saturnian current laid bare.
Wow, profound. Love it.
Very profound. And so maybe we can just dive into it then.
All right, let's dive into it. So you've selected a bunch of different passages for us, correct?
Many different passages. It is divided into a series of sections, and each section is like an essay or a series of personal reflections. And then there's a beautiful poem meets diary entry passage, and then there's the beautiful artwork at the end. Once you've absorbed his philosophy, you can view the artwork through the proper lens.
Beautiful. I'm excited to dig in.
So this is the introduction from Letter to Sorcerers. Here too there are stars. Dear friends and allies, do you know what the dark arts are to me? Poisonous beauty hovering in suspense over the abyss. The awakening of a deeper identity, a complex relational field of both terror and redemption, a roar of raw elemental power, the light of blackness itself. Allow me to start at the beginning. Once upon a time, there was a chthonic blackness from which arose an unclean signal glyph, a sign of future becoming. The origin of our craft lies deeply hidden within the Paleolithic caves. People entered zones of total darkness to gain insight and visions into an alternate reality that they projected onto cave walls and ceilings like motion pictures. The area of invisibility at the end of the underground passages served as an entrance to the other worlds, as a gateway to transformation. The black light that shines at the core of nature has lost none of its power and is still able to put us in touch with our root and the reality of the all-consuming fire of time. Yet few today seem to have a yearning for an art that aims at chthonic realms, which in their unfathomable depths always merge into cosmic dimensions. Contemporary art has lost its connection to the universe, and my experience of more than 30 years in the art world has taught me that the will to restore it is seen as strangely out of place by those engaged in the cultural sector today. Let us not eschew the obvious. Art made for purposes other than being shown and collected is hardly welcomed by a system that is part of a capitalized mass culture. Galleries can't sell black light, and museums have little use for artists who summon dark mystical forces in their white cube spaces. Driven by the illusion of neutral space, art galleries and museums have built an entire worldview around light and everything it represents. Nothing is more necessary in times of light and information overload than an art that is occult in the original etymological sense of the word. The occult points us towards that which cannot be easily consumed and digested. We sorcerers are not driven by the pursuit of visibility for its own sake, nor do we care how highly we rank on a list of popular artists or how well we are connected to global networks. What motivates us is the intense physical experience of life itself. The dark arts are an expression of a philosophy of alterity, a politics of heresy, and a metaphysics of revolt that aims to change our being in the world.
Wow. That is so profound. And, you know, it comes from a place of true experience. You know, we talk often about this concept you see it in like Nietzsche as well as in the Greek, is the Apollonian and the Dionysian, right? The Dionysian is this chthonic. The Apollonian is entirely represented here by the museum and by those white cubes, by the light. And what we see in these kind of Apollonian realms is this pursuit of perfection and this high art, but this righteousness often turns to decay. Or turns to stagnation. It turns to a place of tradition, and it mitigates your experience. It wants to protect itself and its traditions, and it becomes this embodiment of a moment, and it's incapable of any kind of truthful reflection outside of that moment. And it becomes you wind up enshrining something as beautiful, but by doing so, you almost then denigrate everything else. And there becomes this break with the natural world in the process of change. It becomes this deeply problematic place of nostalgia.
Totally. It's like they create this series of pretenses of what art, like preconceived notions of what art is and should be, and they sort of gatekeep that.
100%. And then on top of this, we have this whole capitalist culture where everything has to be both seen, in order for art to be popular, it has to be seen. The more exposed, the more popular it is. So then everything is engaged in this almost superficiality and this virality and this shock, right? So much of contemporary art is reduced to just shock and awe or parody or silliness. And there is a point and place for these things, but it becomes almost, it becomes so confined in this space. Like he's saying, you create these perfected white cubes, and only art that can be shown in these places matter. Whereas art is of Gast nature, and art of this more magical nature is meant to be confronted. It's meant to challenge you and transform you on a personal level. And it's not meant to be bound by any structures. It has to exist in this natural transforming way, right?
Absolutely. Magic has its own personal structure for everyone, right? It's not a grand design.
No, it's not a grand design, and it's not meant to be enshrined and projected, in a moment. It's meant to evolve and transform with the natural world around it. Any good art will eventually decay, but if you enshrine it in the museum and you project it as this penultimate beauty, like I often think about like the Mona Lisa, right? Which is, in pop art is seen as this high standard pinnacle of beauty, but that's all manufactured because of media. It was stolen and then that compounded and compounded and compounded, and it's created a mythology, that feeds on itself. But we've all seen that painting. We can all go online and see it right now. You don't need to go confront it in the Louvre. It's not going to do anything for you.
No.
Awesome. Any thoughts on this before we continue?
I just want to say that it's a very powerful opening statement, I think, and it captivated me right from the beginning. That's all I have.
It's really profound. This is someone who's deeply thought about this and has engaged in this kind of on this artistic creation, and has come up wanting, and I love that they're willing to challenge the system and create outside of the system. Beautiful stuff.
I think that's a perfect segue into the next passage. Okay. So he says, "Let's descend into the dark corners of the earth that have not yet been fully taken over by capitalism. The revolution begins here in the world of shadows. The dark arts elude rationality and reason, so those in power cannot easily appropriate them. When we succeed in aligning our waking consciousness with our deepest dreams, it becomes a contagious drive for transformation. The dark arts operate on the border where the existing ends and the new begins. Evolution is mysterious and open-ended. By willingly exposing ourselves to the outside, we allow new possibilities of participation and symbiosis to emerge. What we usually define as the outside is already present within. We participate in complex networks in which our human parts intersect with the currents of the earth. We are living beings made of geological materials such as calcium, iron, and phosphorus. Our skeleton is mineral. Our immune system relies on parasitic worms to function properly, and there are more bacteria in our bodies than human components. It seems that the flora of our intestinal system alone consists of 100 trillion microorganisms. Whose body is it, anyway?
Wow. This is something I've often thought about. We are not an individual in the truest sense of that word. The self is made up of billions of beings, not just yourselves, but like he points out, all of these other organisms that both feed off of and sustain us, that are necessary for the entirety of our functionality. And it also, I'm immediately confronted with this idea, the Saturnian is that which is shunned. It's that which is vilified and made evil and brought low and disregarded and otherized, so there is this desire to re-examine the other and to push back against these narratives, this why is something evil? Is it evil? And this is something that, or what is it really? We constantly think about these things, the viruses and the bugs and all of this stuff around us and these microbial organisms as something that is negative and is evil, as other, when it is deeply intrinsically a part of our entirety of being and it can't be removed. In the original conception, Saturn is Kronos is an agricultural god, a time god. There is this violence there, but the violence is instilled in a very different way. It isn't until, the rise of the Abrahamic religions, and specifically Christianity, where you have this extreme othering in Saturn and Pan, and all of the pagan world becomes this radical satanic other, this force to be contended against. And it's a misconception. It's a radical misconception, and it's a denial of the true reality that we're faced with. We all have to contend with violence and death, and these serve function just like the microorganisms in our body.
Definitely. And I really started believing this when I was in university, because I took a lot of microbiology courses and human anatomy and stuff. And that really brought in my perspective of the self as being multitudes.
Right.
And so,
go ahead, sorry.
I was just saying, seeing this mirrored again in someone else's work really helped reinforce that sort of belief that I had.
Yeah, it helped you expand upon that idea into something, seeing it reflected back in a new way is always so profound. And, this is really interesting too, talking about the evolution as this mysterious open-ended process, right? So much of evolution is based upon this confrontation. And it's only when things are when there is this kind of conflict, that evolution sort of arises. Evolution kind of relies on this sort of change and this forcing of adaptation. We need to contend with the violence, with the Saturnian, with these bacteria. And if we did not contend with them, would we not stagnate? Would we? I remember I brought this up several times, but there's this idea that you get within in science fiction, like pop science fiction. Asimov, at the end of his grand epic Foundation, has humanity merge into a single multitudinous organism that is both the many and the one, and it becomes this galaxia being. And on one hand, this seems like this profound beauty, but then you have Frank Herbert, who sees this as the ultimate destruction. He sees this as cannot end in anything but stagnation, because now you do not allow for growth and change. You have become the singularity. And what can the singularity do? Where can it evolve to? What can it grow to? Whereas, in Frank Herbert's conception, he creates a Saturnian tyrant that forces humanity to spread out among the stars and evolve into the multitude, And it's something we need to consider, right? Like, there's beauty in the Apollonian, but there's also beauty in the Chthonian, in the Dionysian, in the Saturnian, and there is this profound knowledge there that needs to be contended with. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Let's continue.
Sure. So this next passage, so we're still on the introduction section here. Human domination of the planet is taken for granted these days, but the earth has never been ours and never will be. We need to free ourselves from the illusion of total control and expose ourselves to the planetary realities in which we participate. The signs of change are all around us, but we don't know if we are witnessing the collapse of the world as we have known it or the beginning of something completely new. Fundamental changes are always accompanied by the fear of the unknown. The metamorphosis we are going through is an identity-shattering process, but our enlightened civilization does not teach us how to deal with extreme transformational crises. In a culture obsessed with light and clarity, we have forgotten how to deal with forces that are too obscure to be quickly explained away. The dark arts offer us a way of encountering and processing the unknown. To use them effectively, we should look for both archaic and highly evolved ways of dealing with the other. The way we see the world has changed drastically over time, but there is a continuum between our old myths and our latest evolutionary theories. What underlies both the most abysmal sorceries and our most recent philosophies of becoming is the terrifying but ultimately liberating interaction between human and non-human actors. The way in which theories of posthumanism describe contemporary mutational currents, often strongly reminiscent of the merging of the sorcerer with the demonic other. Both systems of thought strive to change our perspective and allow us to participate in complex feedback processes. Our future will depend on how well we manage to mediate the power relations between all kinds of planetary actors, including ourselves.
Oh, wow. What are your thoughts on this before I dig in?
Right. So he says it in the passage, posthumanism. This is a thread that is very interesting to me, and he presents it in a way throughout this book that is quite touching and moving, in the sense that we need to really re-examine our place in the world, not as this apex devouring being, but as part of this grand ecosystem. And the way he says, our enlightened civilization does not teach us how to deal with extreme transformational crises. This is so true. We are not prepared for any sort of crisis, let alone a transformational personal crisis or a societal transformational crisis,
Oh, 100%, right? We were talking about this before with the dinosaurs, nothing is certain, only in nature will persist. And we've had many different epochs, many different species that rose to the top and then fell. Humanity, we have this moment, this intelligence, we have this ability to extend ourselves through technology and through philosophy and art. And the question is, can we rise to this moment? And can we adapt and transform out of this hubris? Can we truly integrate with the natural world and see ourselves as a part of it? It's in my conception, I look at, a lot of modern science is this kind of, it's created such profound, powerful, transformative tech and other things, but at the same time, it has caused this deep separation. It has caused this incredible hubris. It has caused us to see ourselves as somehow separate from the natural world and no longer a part of these processes. But this is a fundamental reality: is that if we do not adapt, humanity will be destroyed. Life will persist. It will evolve into something else, and it may not be us, right? Or we have to evolve into the other, this post-humanist expression. This is something that I think about often, in the Greek mythology. A lot of people forget about about Zeus and Metis and Athena. This is the later. So people always focus on Kronos and how Kronos consumes his children and he enters into the state of stagnation. And because of that, Rhea, engages in this process of protecting Zeus and then giving him the thunder and the lightning and destroying Kronos, bringing Kronos low, where he has to be castrated and transformed and reflect upon his violence and his mistakes. And he has to go through that process of recycling in order to be reborn again and new, in order to transform those mistakes into something different, But the same process also is going to happen to Zeus. It is all included in the Orphic theogonies, Zeus's half, his feminine side, is Metis, and he has a vision that Metis is going to give birth to a child that will destroy him, that will be greater than him. So he consumes Metis. But this does not prevent the birth. Instead, Hephaestus gives the child the weaponry. Dionysus teaches the magic. There's all of these gods conspire in the background, and Athena bursts forth from Zeus's head. And she is this new arising of the divine feminine, but also this in an androgynous form, in a non-binary form. And in this evolved form. It's like the Artemis evolved, and it's this idea that we need to transform ourselves and become something greater through our reason and through our action. We reject the masculine and bring in the feminine this time, and then, but we keep certain aspects of it. It's like we want to evolve into this non-binary thing. That's something that's greater than what we came before. We all understand this kind of moment as a collective, where we see this incredible fear, the incredible hubris of humanity. And we need to evolve past this. We have to break free of these limitations that define us. Too many of us are unwilling to confront the absurdity of life and allow others to lie to us and to usurp our will, or we are these greedy people who usurp the will of others and try to stop time, try to prevent transformation. And neither of those processes is right. Gast sees this evolutionary cycle. He sees that we have to become this post-human other, and we will, whether we choose to or not. To exist is to be transformed. And do we engage in this and become something greater, or do we return back to a more primitive state? It remains to be seen. Wow, I love that. Do you have any other thoughts?
My last thought on this passage is that he says the dark arts offers a way of encountering and processing the unknown. It's like in a society that has very little spiritual anything, it's right. Like if we're feeling that pain and that uncertainty, we can turn to these practices to find a deeper understanding of ourselves, and there is a way to spiritually enrich your life, I think.
Oh, 100%. In my personal spiritual journey, I spent a long time engaged with religion, trying to find truth, or trying to find something that could offer me this method of confrontation, of understanding and coping with things. And for me, it wasn't until I broke with religion and with the law and confronted the violence in the form of Saturn, in the form of Cybele, Rhea, that I was able to truly, see this. You have to contend with the other and recognize its point. You have to deal with the dark and the death and the decay. You can't shirk from this kind of reality. You have to embrace it, and you have to let it transform you. The other, that which scares you, often is not as scary as you think it is. When you gaze at it and you contend with it and you try to understand it, that's when true magical process happens. But, our society is so afraid of this, because in this process of engaging the other and trying to understand it, you transform yourself and you're no longer the same. And people want to remain in sameness, but it is this sameness that is the problem. It is this refusal to transform that could potentially destroy us. And we're at this moment where we all need to embrace this uncertainty and confront the reality. Like, the world could die. We could upset the natural balance so that life as we know it no longer persists on this earth. And it is something radically different, and it's not us. That is a true reality that could potentially come, and what are our societies doing? Telling you to burn more oil, telling you need to sell more tchotchkes, like waste your time in this illusion of freedom, right? Like, sorry to rant, but yeah.
Okay, we're here to talk.
All right.
So
So
next passage, I really like this one. That's because it speaks to. I'll just read the passage, then I'll talk about it.
for sure.
Neurologists point out to us that the worst aspect of depression is that it narrows the field of vision so that we see no way to escape our present condition. If we can change the way we look at the world, we may realize that new possibilities are emerging from the ashes of empire. The task that awaits us is to find our equivalent of the practices that helped our ancestors face the massive threats at the end of the Ice Age. We need to reclaim the art and wisdom that rose from the womb of the cave. But to survive the violence of our times, we should live our visions right here in the present. The dark arts are not something from the past. They embody timeless techniques for renewing the world through visionary experience. What we need is a new form of perception that enables us to see the world through the eyes of the other. Our sorcerer's task is to become something else, something beyond human, to transform in the flow of change itself. Our present physical and mental structure does not condition our alien future. Ultimately, the radical otherness of radiant darkness teaches us the demonic art of living beyond the edge of a fixed form. Its sublime paradox abolishes the distinction between being and non-being and leads us into the void from which all existence springs. Let the unborn arise in us, invisible.
Wow. So I'm sure you have some deep thoughts on this as someone who has struggled with mental illness. Can you talk about this from your personal experience?
Yeah, so this, the depression, how it narrows the field of vision, so we see no way to escape. It very much, mental illness, like any, difficult experience or painful experience, creates almost a lens through which you're seeing yourself in the world. It creates like a barrier between yourself almost, and you have to work with it constantly to break down these barriers and to constantly be in touch with yourself and with the world around you, because it can easily consume you and you can become lost in that pain and you forget the point of it and forget that you can transform and forget that there's a way out and that pain becomes all that you know.
Wow. No, yeah, that is such a profound truth, right? Anyone who's dealt, and we've all dealt with aspects of depression, even if we haven't felt mental illness. To be alive is to confront suffering, right? And this is such a primordial experience of all life, right? And it's something that we have to contend with. And, when we engage in a lot of this mythopoetic imagery of the ancients and the ancestors, what we see is this refusal to sit, this refusal to not adapt and to face, right? Like depression wants you to stagnate. It wants you to sit and not do anything about your current situation. But it's that sitting and not doing that perpetuates that current situation, and this is why we need this community to come together and help each other to see and to continue forward along these paths, because we have to continue. You have to continue to evolve and to transform and to confront. The only way to truly to face this kind of suffering is to transmute it, is to create, and it's to face these others, to face the pain, to face what is challenging and fearful. It's such I love this because it really, this is one of the best summaries of the Saturnian path I've ever seen. And this is a path that is largely, that is largely overly spoken of in a verbose way, and it is hidden in amongst these dark occultists. But this is something that is universal, that we see across the world, and that we all need to engage with. That confrontation is important. That engaging with the other, that facing your fears, taking the leap, jumping into creation, perpetuating life. The dark arts and facing death produces life. There's two sides of this coin, and this is what I think a lot of the more light-minded magicians ignore, those on the Apollonian side. Their righteousness and their desire for personal power on one hand, and for protection and for safety and for rigid structure, it calcifies, and it winds up leading to stagnation. And this fear of death and this fear of other only maximizes the other. It only brings it about. If you invoke the Virgin and you're obsessed with the purity of the Virgin, then by definition, you bring on the destruction of Lady Babylon. Okay, she will come and destroy, because you cannot be in that perfection. You cannot be in that state. That state is a lie, and you need to be transformed by it. But if you instead engage with the death and the decay, if you purposely transform yourself, you can persist life into the future. You can bring the new and the rebirth. Yeah,
definitely. And I love what he says here about bringing sorcery into the present. Sorcery is a timeless series of timeless techniques for renewing the world, and it's about discovering what rites and rituals are necessary for us in this day and age, while still being informed by the ancestors of our ancestors, because clearly they have wisdom. But we can't live in the past. We're in the now. We need to modify them.
Exactly, right? The past is the past, and there is it was forced into a transformation. We came to this point for a reason. There's a natural progression in a certain sense, even if it's not always a linear one or anything like that. But we need to constantly be moving in a forward progression. The ideal of the Saturnian magician is to engage in the necromantic practice of taking the voices of the dead and bringing them into the present, so that we can truly learn and reflect upon their mistakes, and we can understand and we can move forward. Like Saturn is the god of wisdom because he failed, because he was brought low and meant to reflect upon himself, because he was made other. All of this stuff, now he becomes that radical force that can truly shed a light, paradoxically, that black sun. He sheds a light upon our current reality and gives us an alternative perspective, one that we can't see ourselves. And that is so necessary for this evolutionary and this transformation that's at the heart of this magical expression. I really love this line. Ultimately, the radical otherness of radiant darkness teaches us the demonic art of living beyond the edge of a fixed form. Its sublime paradox abolishes the distinction between being and non-being and leads us into the void from which all existence springs. Let the unborn arise in us invisible, right? This allows for this incredible potentiality. It allows for so much experience. And you no longer are bound by these rigid definitions. You throw definition out the wayside, things like gender, things like, being and non-being have no meaning, in the radical otherness of the blind dragon,
Totally. So from here, we go into the next section of the book, which is titled What Dreams Those Forests? And he opens here with a very interesting personal vision. And I thought it was important to include here. So he says, unaware of the presence of a tick attached to my abdomen, I went to bed one night in late spring and experienced exceptionally intense hypnagogic visions while falling asleep. Something happened to me that night. What should have been a vague memory to shake off in the morning became an obsessing, though liminal, experience. I could not help asking questions that are impossible to answer. Was the creature dreaming inside me? Did our experiences melt into each other? Were we temporarily sharing a single body and mind? The visionary states between wakefulness and dreams are too wild to be faithfully translated into the written word, and I can't completely recall the cascade of visual hallucinations that engulfed me. What I do remember is the sensation of being pulled out of my body and falling through trees that possessed and emanated energies that were both alien and powerful. I no longer felt myself as an individual with a single awareness, but as a profusion of beings and selves who expanded out into the depths of forest. The experience triggered a series of observations.
Oh, wow. That is so profound. And it reminds me of personal visions and such. Have you ever had this kind of experience, Graham?
Maybe only in psychosis.
That's
I would
valid.
say, where it blurs the line between reality that you're facing and the reality that is in your mind, and it's almost too much to put into words, and it's just a powerful sensation and experience. And I have had this feeling of expanding into a profusion of a multitude of selves, a multitude of beings. It's a bit of that.
Yeah, no, I so relate, and I'll do a little personal gnosis here, but take this for as you will, since Gast is doing the same thing. I once engaged in a ritual to Dionysus where I also was taking a heroic dose of mushrooms. And I remember I was meditating or attempting to meditate, and I fell asleep. Okay. And then I wake up. But when I wake up, I'm no longer in my bed. I'm in the cosmic blackness of the womb. And I am the cosmic being, Phanes, or, the Prajapati, that radical other, the protogonos, the bigendered cosmic person. And I felt this incredible aloneness for the first time. I felt utterly singular, and I rejected it and hated it. And it felt like an eternity, but eventually I ripped myself apart into two. And then I wound up engaged in this love affair and this violent struggle with the other, who was also me. And we were debating on who was to be the receptive person in lovemaking and constantly fighting with each other, though engaged in this passionate pursuit. And it was like this radical experience of this, of the multitude. And it continued to descend down throughout this experience. And for the first, I really experienced this idea of the all too. Eventually what happened is it started to come in this wave where I felt myself being ripped apart into the very single particles of everything and pulled to every part of the universe, and then reassembled back into the cosmic one over and over and over again, like one of those pendulums that hits itself and then backs up and hits itself and backs up. But also it was coinciding with my breath. And I've never been able to shake that image ever since. And it's deeply connected me to reality,
That's a profound experience.
And I see as very similar things here, It's just, I love this kind of stuff, and I think that we all need to engage, maybe not in an entheogenic practice, do what works for you, but we need to take that time to sit with the self and confront the other and confront the black, to sit in the silence. You will experience something if you persist.
Definitely. So this next passage is a little bit longer, but I think, again, it was quite important to include. So he says, my primary motivation for going into the woods were and still are to gain a root understanding of the world and to study non-human anonymous sorcery. I want to learn and understand the system through which the sorcerer's power flows. Art, like sorcery, is, I believe, a creative practice that acts on the planet as a whole and not just in a cultural framework. Drawing from the forests, underworld, and the earth and the palpable but mostly hidden forces of nature, I started to make art that is essentially experiential and often invisible to the human eye. Over the past months, I buried decomposable work in the soil to absorb and disseminate power beneath. I ritually blackened dead trees, wood decaying fungi, and trunk wounds. I excavated roots, carved them, and put them back into the ground. I shaped tree limbs that have known the ravaging force of wildfire into dark antlered figures. I exposed leaves on which I had drawn cosmic lines to the erosive agents of rivers, wind, and weather. There must not always be a human spectator for art to exist. I work daily with the forces at work in the forest and watch it perform its living play and drama. I observed birth, growth, and decay on the forest floor, the hunting habits of various predators, Northern Europe's hottest and driest summer, the longest blood moon eclipse in decades, lightning that should not exist, electrical storms, changing weather, and passing seasons. Besides ticks, I was also attacked by caterpillars, an army of flies, and red ants, to name but a few. The woods are populated by beings who assault and affect all that comes within their reach. Everything here is in a permanent state of transgression. We are connected to a web of power relations in which everything interacts. If we wish to enter into dialogue with the non-human world and experience art as a symbiotic practice, the forest is a perfect place to dwell.
Wow.
So we haven't described much of his practice here. Many of the rituals that he engages in the forest, and he describes the ecosystem of the forest and what it's like living in the pulse of the earth, you know?
Right. And engaging, right? Like, you know, where I live, right? I'm right on the cusp of Lake Superior Park, which is one of the largest government parks in all of Canada, one of the largest forests in the entire world. And I'm just on the cusp, and because I'm by the river, I get to experience like a bit of the forest, and it is profound and it is terrifying. You know, I often go and I spend hours out into the forest, you know, and if you go and you meditate in the forest, you will be attacked by bugs, by everything. But at the same time, you'll see the faces in the trees. You will see, you know, everything is alive, everything is other, and there's this perpetual awareness that is present. And I think he's speaking to this, you know, like it is such a, you know, it's really unfortunate, but within our cities, we have disconnected ourselves from the natural processes of the world, of this experience of decay and stuff. When we do experience it, it's a parody of itself that's ramped up to 100. We don't experience the natural cycles from which animals and life persist. And so much of his art is engaging with this, like taking your pieces and giving them to the earth. Like that is such a profound offering. And it's like not for anyone, it's for the earth. You know, like this is something that's radically different than the vast majority of artists. And engaging with the decay, with the mushrooms, you know, with the trees, right? To me, this is like the most Dionysian stuff imaginable. Dionysus is the tree. Dionysus, he is the thing that comes out of the ground, the god of the plants. And it is he that reassembles the shit to create new life. And this is that Negrido, that alchemy that he's engaged in. It's beautiful. Have you had any experiences with the woods, Graham?
So my home when I grew up was along the river, and in between my property and the river was a thin stretch of forest. And I was fortunate because my town used to be fairly remote, and so there'd be a wide assortment of wilderness and animals that would come through, especially in the winter, because the river would freeze, and so deer would cross, coyotes would come across, large foxes. We would see beavers, otters in the spring. And it was very much like this mini microcosm of nature right in my backyard. But it was also very ugly. You know, if you sit in there, you're going to be consumed. There was marshland. So if you sit outside, you're going to be consumed by thousands of mosquitoes. And, you know, gnats. But part of the beauty is experiencing that. and realizing that you really are just a part of nature's cycle when you begin to be fed upon by insects, in
Yeah,
nature.
you have to contend with nature. You have to struggle against the other. You have to fight against these bugs. You got to douse yourself in the smoke and find ways to repel them. You have to protect yourself from the bears. You have to hide your food in the trees. You got to fight off the raccoons. You have to engage with all of this. And if you don't, nature has a way. It's very easy to be destroyed by it. I often think of there was that movie that came out. It's based on a book series where this guy, I'm trying to remember, you may remember the movie, but it's about the guy who goes into the wild, yes, where he goes out to find that van. And he has this, to go experience the Alaskan wilderness. And he has this incredible hubris. And I read the book, and I admire this person on many, many levels. And this desire to break free from capital and to return to a more pure reality. But the hubris and the disconnection from the natural world destroyed him. In the book, they talk about how the RCMP and the police believe that he's the one who trashed, just an hour from his camp, there was a cabin he could have gone to for food. He trashed it and destroyed it. Another 2 hours down the way along the river was a ferry that he could have gotten out. He misread his books and eats the wrong tuber, which fundamentally kills him. Nature does not have any time for the unreasonable. You need to have wisdom. You need to be in this. It's out to get you. And we who have been born in the cities and born in modernity and modern society and the comforts of the home are so disconnected from that reality. And even this desire to go back, if you do not take it seriously, nature will consume you.
It is ruthless. It has its own laws, and it cares not for the human individual process.
No, you are just another thing to that world. You will be consumed and recycled like anything else.
Definitely.
Let's continue.
Sure. So now he says, as an alternative to a human-centric approach, I want to suggest the possibility of shifting our perspective to align ourselves with the sorcerer's current, the universal force of change that acts upon all substances and affects all things. This is the sorcerer's grail, the ultimate goal, to incorporate the current and play an active part in the universal circuit of matter and consciousness. We act in the game of survival as one among many creatures. Death is our central challenge, but death is not our enemy. The interaction between life and death is a necessary cause of the creative process. We usually shy away from the fact that our lives are nourished through the death of other beings, but we cannot get something from nothing. We consume living things and will someday be consumed by other living things. Life does not belong to particular beings. It is based on the principles of transition, conversion, and transformation. Our sorcerer's task consists in transferring the power of transformation from our visions to our working practices. By overcoming the human condition in our dreams, we anticipate our future in the elemental sphere. At our core, we all have a radical alien essence. Sooner or later, it will shift us from flesh to multiplicity at one with existence.
Wow.
Pretty much of what we've been touching on already, but it's just the way he phrases things is so profound that I felt the need to include it. And the way he says, at our core, we all have a radical alien essence. There's the other in all of us. And we have to recognize this other in all of us in order to move forward, to realize that the other is not really the other.
Exactly. We need to embrace, I really love, there's a couple lines here that are there, where you're talking about the grail, this ultimate goal, right? Those of us who are engaged with the Greek mythology of the grail, we know that the grail is the tripod. It is the thing that contains the porneia, the effluence of the high priestess who's engaged in the mania, and then this is drunk to induce the madness, to truly confront the other and to be possessed, to lose total control of the self, right? This is the ultimate goal, in a sense, is to engage in this form of possession and to experience that panic, right? To embrace that awe, right? The reason why the mysteries are so difficult is because in order to experience the awe, there is a death of self. But it is not a true death, because the self exists within the all, but it is a breakdown of our current conceptions of reality. You know, you need to be confronted. You need to be challenged. Pan is that force that induces such fear, but at the same time brings such comfort. You know, it's like the drop merges into the ocean, but the ocean merges into the drop. You know, there is a unity and a separation, and we need to embrace and understand this. And I really just like the way that he's engaging with this. You know, our sorcerer's tasks consists in transferring the power of transformation from our visions to working powers. By overcoming the human condition in our dreams, we anticipate our futures in the elemental sphere. At our core, we have a radical alien essence, you know, like embracing this other, confronting yourself through this dream, through these visionary experiences, and imagining ourselves into the future. That is the essence of magical work, magical practice, you know, at least the chthonic practice, that Saturnian practice. Beautiful.
Definitely. So now we come to the next section, which he's titled Here's the Prophecy. And he touches again a little bit on otherness here. He says, now I hear again and again that there's no otherness left. But is that really so? If it is true that the great other has disappeared from public life, then maybe it's time to embody it ourselves, by the lives we live and by the work we create. What if we restore art to its sorcerer's origin, instead of seeing it as something to be evaluated and consumed by others? What if we radicalize our practice instead of letting it become part of mass culture? The value of our art is something that we must define for ourselves. It is an individual discovery that we will only fully understand at the end of a lifelong quest. Sorcery is not concerned with artistic and social validation. It's essentially a way of working and existing outside cultural and social bonds. Sorcery makes us disappear into solitary practice and struggle. It helps us regain a sense of power and independence, and it fosters new and different ways of thinking and doing.
100%, especially the Saturnian sorcery, right? Where you embrace this hermitage, you go into the isolation, you imprison the self, and you reflect upon the shadow. You fully embrace the negative aspects, the death, the decay, the sadness, the issues, the mistakes that we've made. And it's through this reflection and this engagement that we transform the self. You know, it's all about that conflict, and that conflict that leads to transformation and integration, you know. Beautiful stuff. And in restoring art to its sorcerer's origins, right? This individual expression of self and experience, and contending with that experience and using that experience to transform others, you know, like this book is such a hyper sigil. You know, it's such a profound magical work that it's calling to us all to engage in these practice.
Definitely. And I love this next passage. He talks a little bit more about his actual artistic processes. He says, art is made of more than human things. It is co-created and transformed by all kinds of planetary forces and beings. The work that Nadine and I have been creating in the Ardennes forest over the past 14 months has been continually transformed by changing seasons and weather. Scorching summers molded the wax of which some parts of the sculptures are made into monstrously reshaped figures and faces. Freezing temperatures made the sculptures appear fissured and fractured. Gusts of strong wind warped them or knocked them down. Riotous vegetation overgrew them. All appearance of stability is deceptive when you work outside of museum walls. What makes things even more perilous is that sorcerous objects are often made of a mixture of organic and inorganic materials. They exist somewhere between the living and the dead. Elementals, bacteria, and fungi inhabit them. Dragonflies land on them. Birds shit on them. Rats and mice feed on them. Spiders weave their webs around them. Insects lay their eggs inside them. Sorcery is a dangerous and messy affair, as it brings together what is supposed to stay apart. What our cultural tradition separates into clear-cut categories becomes confused in speculative assemblages where everything seeps into everything else. Sorcery confounds the human and the non-human along with the living and the dead. Its way of working is based on complex interminglings of conflicting realities. Nothing is permanent in the sorcerer's garden, and everything that defines us or our art as solely human is of little consequence here.
Wow. This is such an embrace of reality. And this is something, it's such a breath of fresh air. And the engagement of this decay and transformation of the natural environment upon the artwork that these two amazing, brilliant, beautiful people are creating is so wonderful. You know, we're going to get to see some examples of that in the end. And you can really see how much it shapes and it creates this profound ugliness in a visceral sense, but it's through this perception of that it leads to this incredible understanding and this beauty. You know, we have to engage with this kind of stuff. So much of our world wants to transform these things and remove the decay and make it an illusion, make it a falsehood, you know, but our bodies are in this constant state of decay. We just don't perceive it as often. Or when we do perceive it, we engage in radical transformative techniques in order to prevent that change, whether it is through clothing and makeup or diet, or even through plastic surgery, or who knows what people are willing to do. You know, we're entering into this transhuman mode, and part of that is going to be this radical rejection of death. And to me, I think that is the most hubris you could possibly have. And that terrifies me, you know. On one hand, we need to evolve and transform, but can you truly conquer death? And if we conquer death in any legitimate sense, what would that mean for us as human beings and our morality? You know, it raises such incredible questions, and I love it.
It's a wonderful passage. And it just, again, I love describing how, you know, he creates these sculptures, these works, and then lets nature take its course. And the photographs that we'll see later on are of these works in varying states of decay and states of nature reclaiming what he has borrowed.
That's beautiful. Such an embrace of transformation and the Negrido that we seldom see because people are so afraid.
Mm-hmm. So now he says, I believe solitude and deep looking lie at the root of any serious creative practice. Sometimes we need to be slowed down to see the depth of our existence. What brought me to a halt was an injury that resulted from an intense, extended period of work that lasted several years or probably decades. I can't say that I enjoy the chronic pain and the physical restraints that it entails. But what that old devil Saturn made me realize is that sorcerer's power and wisdom not to be obtained from the heights, but from the depths below.
Yeah.
So
this is really profound. Go ahead, Graham.
He's speaking about some of his personal experience here. I don't know the exact details, but he did suffer a back injury, which was one of the impetuses for moving to a more isolated location, I believe. And so he's talking about the chronic pain from this injury and how it impedes him in a lot of his daily motion, but that he's learning from this pain and is helping him see different truths perhaps about the universe.
Pain is such a difficult thing. And we see people get utterly destroyed by pain, or we see people contend with pain in radical ways. You know, I see this image of when I was studying in India, in Maharashtra, in Mumbai. There's this famous temple you can go to where there's these monastics, these yogis or sadhus that engage in a process of, call them the dancing bubbas, where they refuse to sit. And they show this radical control over self and this radical rejection of this not so they don't reject this reality, I should say, but they reject this place as an illusion, you know, and they see it as this play, this game, and they choose to engage in a radically different way. And through the power of the mind, they transform pain into pleasure. And through the use of cannabis and other things, they transform this pain into this experience of this incredible vision and this visionary profundity, you know, and they engage in this process of meditation unto death, you know, where they purposely allow their bodies to rot and be destroyed, you know, in order to feel this pain that becomes pleasure and to experience this pain that becomes vision, you know. And this is a deeply profound thing that we all have to kind of contend with, and we all have to find ways. You don't necessarily have to go to the extremes of the sadhu. You can do what Gast is doing here, confronting pain and confronting it on a truly personal self. And I also think a lot about the Saturn figure. We've talked about Saturn a lot, right? That force with the knife behind you, constantly telling you to persist forward or he will destroy you. You know, the pain is so much makes us imagine and understand our limitations, makes us recognize our eventual end. It's a warning and it's a lesson and it's a reality. And it's not something that can be disengaged from. It either has to be transformed or contended with. But either way, it is going to transform you.
Totally.
Wow.
So now we come to the next section, which is Soiled by Rebel Powers, Part 1, Toward the Dark Sacred. And he says, a growing number of people locate the roots of our destructive attitude towards the planet in the loss of the sacred in nature. It is well recognized that the emergent monotheisms of the first millennium BC exorcised the sacred from the world to relocate it in transcendental realms beyond Earth. Monotheism represented a massive split in the relationship between humans and nature, but it was the Enlightenment and the Protestant Reformation that finally put an end to the concept of a sacred nature in Europe. I do not believe that it is possible or even desirable to return to an idealized past, to reconnect with nature in the way that our pagan ancestors did. If we long for a sacred relationship with nature, it can only occur in terms of a dark sacred, a direct face-to-face encounter with the dirty ecologies of a poisoned planet. The world is drunk with poison. You may not see the poisons immediately on your stroll through the woods. They may hide in the sap of trees, in the water of streams and rivers, or deep below in the layers of the earth, but they are there. And they are here to stay. And at least in the case of nuclear waste, they are here to stay for a very long time. And it's only the beginning. So let's stop pretending that there's a way back to the innocent and healthy state in which our ecosystems evolved.
Oh, do I ever love this. Do you have any comments, Graham?
Huh?
Do you have any comments?
I'll let you speak.
Oh my gosh. This is so profound. This is everything that we've been talking about, you know. And even though like on our channel, we engage with a lot of historical paganism and mythology and a lot of this stuff, there is no desire to recreate these things in that limited sense. We're engaged in this necromantic practice of bringing their voices into the present so that we can project into the future a new reality, so that we can engage with these lessons in a new way and that we can transform the self, you know. We have to adapt to our present. And this is such a recognition of this moment, you know, that we have poisoned our planet. We have caused so much damage and such a disconnection, and it has fundamentally transformed the way that we have to engage, you know, with the natural world. We cannot go back to an innocent past. There is no golden age to return to. The golden age has been destroyed. You know, we, in this moment, at this time, have to transmute the poison, you know, and this is a central image to the magical world and the mythopoetic worldview. You see it in tradition after tradition after tradition, where the hero or the deity or whatever has to confront the snake and take that poison and transmute it. I think of Shiva and the world snake Vasuki at the turning of the ocean of milk. I think of Indra and Vrita in the Rig Vedas. I think of Yogamundir and Thor fishing in the Norse mythologies, Apophis and Mat. There's so much of this kind of thing reflected Apophis and Ra, where they're constantly engaged, or Apep and Ra, constantly engaged in this war. This is something that is so deeply profound, and it's always this thing where we have to engage in this healing process. We have to confront the other, and we have to incorporate it into the self. We have to take that poison and transmute it and allow it to transform us as well. And we have to be engaged in this healing process now. Our world has been polluted. Our world has been damaged. And if we do not recognize this and admit it, we cannot even begin to engage with it,
Exactly. And speaking of engaging with it, I think the next passage will be a good thing to talk about. He says, "Our sorcerer's art will not be able to act in the world if it does not first of all assimilate the black venom in which our planet is soaked. Sorcery does not repel the forces of pollution, but draws them in to redirect them back to the true source of evil, which is not an organic heart of darkness, but an artificial tower of light. At a time when those who destroy the earth hide behind high-definition aesthetics and an immaculate design, to turn our gaze toward the flawed and impaired that lies at the heart of the sacred. What I propose is an art that shows its wounds, a sinister practice that acts as a counterpoison to the aesthetics of sterility." So again, he's talking about assimilating the poison that we put into the earth back into ourselves as a way of combating it and empowering it.
So beautiful and so true to this entire magical process that we've been discussing. And, also this image of the Tower of Light and rejecting it, seeing it as a tower that is corrupted. It's on the verge of falling, and willing to embrace that fall. We need to prepare for when this fall is happening, right? Because it can either come at us like the Tower card in the tarot, where it is sudden and it's a burst of raw violence, or it can come to us like the Death card in tarot, where it is that inevitability that we see coming and that we can contend with. But either way, we have to face this destruction, this ending, and have to transform into the future. But what do you want to do, right? Do you want to have your world pulled out from under you and be utterly destroyed in that moment? Or do you want to contend with death and embrace transformation and reincarnation? Often people who engage with something like the tarot misconstrue these cards, and they think the tower is less evil than death. Can never be. It's the opposite. They're both engaging with the transformation, but one is a sudden destruction, and the other is something that is contended and known, or can be known. That's a fundamental thing. Death can be known. We can prepare for the end. We cannot prepare for the tower's fall, and the tower will fall. It will fall, and what are we going to do about it? I love this. Gast is looking at the foundations, and he doesn't see the light. He sees the holes. He sees the decay that's so essential to his art. He recognizes this moment of, we often talk about the Dionysian and Apollonian, but there should be a third moment that comes after the Apollonian, when that self-righteousness transforms into this Saturnian tyranny that refuses to change and consumes itself and its children, and invites its own destructive end. The tyrant will always fall because of its rigidity and its law and its rejection of nature, and we cannot do what Saturn did. We need to learn from that mistake. We need to see what happened and contend with this reality in a different way.
Totally.
All right.
So now we come to Soil but Rebel Powers Part 2. Revolutionary Withdrawal. The blackness of the universe is the base matter out of which all things come and to which all things return. The black wilderness of the universe can never be understood by rational minds, but only intuited by sacred fools who fearlessly face the threats of abandonment and engulfment. To work with the universe, we have to draw it into the body and make it become part of us. Once we see the same blackness within and beyond, we no longer feel disconnected from the life-death continuum. It is a wisdom as old as humanity itself. But what empowering practices like sorcery can do in these times of depression and anxiety is to create a reciprocal relationship with the planet and give us a new sense of agency. Sorcery expands our sphere of action and allows us to actively participate in a truly universal ecology.
Wow. Yeah, no, this is so fundamental. We have to engage and become back a part of nature. We cannot engage in this separation any longer. We cannot be seeing ourselves as this inevitability, as this, so many of us, I remember talking to friends and my father about this, and they always say, yes, but our technology will save us. We're always on the cusp of some greater thing that'll circumvent nature. Or, one thing I remember, I like this pop star in some ways, Grimes, but she said something that was so utterly just like hurtful to me, which was that she's like, oh, nature needs to be just destroyed and contended with. It's nothing more than the material matter, and we need to rewrite it in our own willed image. And I'm just like, what? Right? That's like going too far the opposite direction, right? Like, oh my gosh, this is we need to recontend and see ourselves as part of this universal whole, as it's not separate, as something, fundamentally natural. And even our technology is a natural expression of nature, and this is, again, like I think of this idea of our technology becoming our child and destroying us, like with Saturn, like with Zeus,
Yeah.
You have anything else to say on this one?
I think we're good. I like this next passage very a lot. That's not really a proper sentence, but
You love it.
There we go. One of the most important things I've learned from observing and contemplating nature is that pain and suffering are part of the fundamental conditions of life. The pain in my body attunes me to an existence that is vaster than the individual human self. Sorceress meditation allows me to alleviate chronic pain by breathing it out into the woods, but the power of transference works both ways. The woods also infect and affect me in return. Working with the forest means creating a dynamic relationship with the totality that envelops and grounds you. This totality includes the geological, mythological, biological, cultural, political, and economic history of a place. It all begins with the truly ancient powers of geology. In the case of the Ardennes forest, we are dealing with an old mountain range formed by intense folding and faults that have inscribed themselves into the landscape and the geological memory of the ground. Combine that with layers of accumulated narratives and myths of the Ardennes as a meeting point of the living and the dead, beliefs of metempsychosis into plants and trees, destruction resulting from industrial deforestation, and the savage ravaging of 2 world wars. And you will get an idea of the traumatic memories that emerge when working ritually with these forests.
Yeah, that's such a profound image to consider, The forest contains all of the pain and suffering of the natural world there, and it reflects it back upon those who engage. Like, what's your thoughts on this?
This is interesting because someone close to me, we were just having a conversation about magic and how what you give in, you have to receive as well. It's a process, almost like bacteriophages, transmitting and receiving information.
100%.
I'm giving my energy to the world and I'm channeling my will, but the world has a will as well, and it will enter you.
Yeah. And engaging with that will, right? And learning from that nature and that force, I often think of the goddess, the mother goddess who, Rhea Sibylle, who sits upon that throne in the celestial sphere, and she keeps things in balance. And when things get out of balance, when people, are destructive of the natural world, when they spurn the most vulnerable, the women and the minorities, and when this kind of insanity comes, she brings nemesis. She brings that destructive force of radical change. She, and this comes like in the book of Revelation as Lady Babylon, or in Thelema as the great goddess Babylon, who rides upon the beast and brings that destruction, and this is something that is to be embraced, and we need to come out. Like the apocalypse is an end to end a beginning. The question is, how does that beginning and what does that ending look like? And we are factors in this, but either way, it is that apocalyptic moment, and it will be a destructive force of radical change because nature demands it. Our hubris and our refusal to engage and our constant consumption cannot be sustained. We cannot dictate the natural world. We do not have the technology nor the wherewithal to do so, at least not anytime soon. Right? And yeah,
Right.
the trauma too, like this idea that within the forest, within the land, within the natural world is that perception of all of the violence that has been experienced, whether it is the environmental violence or the world wars or what have you. The forest maintains that and has to adapt, Love it.
Yeah, it's great. And this next passage is in a similar vein of this needing to engage with the earth and with through our sorcery. He says, as soon as we feel involved in the destructive and transformative processes that shape the planet, we no longer consider the pain of the earth as an intellectual abstraction, but a visceral truth. What we are going through in these pivotal times changes something inside of us. We cannot avoid asking ourselves how to creatively engage the forces that threaten life on Earth and how to direct the experience toward a new sense of being in the world. What I argue for is a dark art of empathy and survival. We perdure only at the cost of renouncing human supremacy. This is a time to tear off our human skin. This is a time to become powerful without being dominant. This is a time to reimagine our place in the world. The world has become too human, all too human.
Wow. What do you think of this?
He's saying really here that we need to transform our relationship with ourselves and with nature now, because we're feeling the pain of the earth in ourselves as we're destroying it.
Yeah, I keep thinking too of this idea of the post-human again is appearing here in the subtext, and this idea of projecting again through dream and through ritual magic an idealized version of the self into the future, of imagining us becoming something different and doing better and being greater, and this radical empathy, the recognition of nature as a living being and humanity's place within that framework rather than separate. Like, this is deep, profound stuff, and something that that is often neglected in a lot of Saturnian magic, or at least it's not discussed, is that radical empathy and that embracing of the natural world and humanity's part in it.
Totally.
Love it.
It's very powerful. So this next passage is a bit shorter, but it really spoke to me as well. He says, however superior we may feel to those we consider to be mere background noise, sooner or later they will devour us, reduce our pride to nothing. We don't own the life that runs through our bodies. We belong to something darker, deeper, and wilder than our hubris allows us to see.
I love this because it's such a truism, and it's so you cannot. We are all interconnected, and that kind of violence and that degradation of that othering it's a lie. It's an incredibly harmful ridiculousness. This creation of hierarchies, the development of a subaltern, that which is not given a voice, that which is shrouded in darkness and otherized. That is the Saturnian. That is what happened to pagan practice in the mind of the Christian. I always think of that passage by the Christian apologist Orosius, who said, all that is evil is pagan. That is their satanic other. It is this nature worship. It is that god of destruction and death, Saturn. It's that the great mother. They turned that into their satanic other, and they made us fearful of these connections, of the natural world, of the serpent, when we're not meant to. We have to face the serpent. We have to transmute the poison. We have to contend with being and non-being. We have to gaze into the abyss and contend with this and allow it to transform us. But they don't want transformation. Their hubris has led them to create these rigid hierarchies with themselves at the top, and they want to sit on the point of the mountain and rule down upon us, rather than to continue to reach for the stars. And we need to break that cycle. And we do it through this radical return to the other, to the dark, to the chthonic, Powerful.
Very powerful. And the next passage is in a similar vein to this post-human concept. He says, I cut off my human head and devote myself to the empty darkness that it leaves behind. This is the anarchic transition into nameless power and freedom, a fertile breeding ground for the outbursts of the masses. The coming insurrection will rise from the chthonic depths of the universe. I invite you, magical revolutionaries and black alchemists, to explore the extreme possibilities of imminent connections and becomings. I call on you to embark on a journey into undifferentiated blackness, where all things morph into each other. It is only from the position of a radical equality that we can launch the sacred conspiracy that will free the body from its head and the earth from its masters.
This couldn't be more profound. And this is something, we need to resist, like so much in occultism, we are confronted with extremism. We were faced with a lot of fascism and the celebration of this rigid hierarchy and law. And we need to revolt against that in every sense of the term, and embrace this philosophical anarchism, this ability to see these laws as human constructions that have no power. They're something that is agreed upon, and even they and us are always in a state of flux. And if we cannot be freed from these shackles that we placed upon ourselves, we are doomed. And we need to contend and come together as a whole to gain as much perspective as possible. We never know where brilliance is going to come. And it's our hubris that says that it has to come from these perfected beings. What perfected beings? What is goodness? We've talked about this so much, like I often think about someone like Helen Keller, in a fascistic world, she would have been killed because she'd be deemed as less than. But this is one of the most profound philosophical minds of all time, and if she did not get to experience that radical love of her nurse who took the time with her, we would have been denied that as a society, and we need to remember that it's this radical love, and it's not that love of the hippie. It's this love of acceptance and challenging. And when you see someone other, that you ask yourself, what are they about? What is going on here? Rather than allowing yourself to be bound by fear and to see yourself reflected, Because we're all connected. We're all a part of the same stuff.
We are connected.
Yeah, no, I love this. I call on you to embark on a journey into undifferentiated blackness, where all things morph into each other. It is only from the position of radical equality that we can launch the sacred conspiracy that will free the body from its head and the earth from its masters, right? This is about breaking free from too much reason. We need to engage with that higher self, that Sophia, the divine wisdom that allows us to see the evil in the light, the darkness in the light, and the light in the dark, and transmute these things. Really, really profound. Love it so much.
It's great. So now we come to the next section, which is called Alchemical Features. And this passage feels very personal to Gast, but it seemed like a very important part of the work. I feel like he wouldn't include this personal passage if it wasn't important to his journey, right? So I felt it was share it. He says, in 1967, on the second night of Christmas, my grandfather, who had just passed away, was laid out in the adjoining bedroom when I had my first life-defining dream. A stone of immense density lay on my chest and cut off my breath. I jolted out of sleep and fell into the heaviness of black matter, which suddenly began to pulsate with violent bursts of light. I was 9 years old then and had no idea what had happened to me. Only much later in life did I realize that a vision of Soul Niger had overwhelmed me. The death of my beloved grandfather, the dreadful night, and the following month of solitude, silence, and traditional Catholic mourning traumatized me to such an extent that I barely grew for the next 3 years. After that Christmas, my life was no longer the same. The lightheartedness of childhood was gone.
Wow.
So the way this resonates with me is the way he says he was traumatized to an extent that he barely grew. You know, and it's like our pain can inform us, but it can also trap us and inhibit us for for very long time sometimes before we come to this place where we can transform this pain into something more. You know?
No, I so relate. And I keep thinking, I grew up within this kind of Catholic background. So I have some experience here, even though my parents had broken from it. All of my family was still, like my extended family, my grandparents were still deeply involved. And the Catholic religion cannot allow you to confront death. It doesn't help you to transmute that pain and to do the proper healing that is necessary, that we see so much throughout the rest of this work that Gast has been showing us. What we see with the Catholic tradition is this lie of immortality, and this refusal to, this belief in like this, because they constantly begged for forgiveness and sacrificed their will to this divine human other, they are saved for it. And it's completely disconnected from the natural world and from our processes of true healing, and this was so profound for me when I started to re-engage with paganism and the Saturnian current, because by engaging with death and with engaging with violence and trying to understand it, by looking at it and fully experiencing it, it's how we are able to truly transmute it. And it's how we begin that path of learning and accepting. And we can't embrace these lies any longer. We have to reject this world that wants to deny death. We're all going to be transmuted, and life is going to continue, but it's going to continue in a new form. There is an immortality of a sense, but it is not this immortality of the Christian, in this imagined holy world, or on this new world on earth that we're all going to be subjected to some eternal hierarchy. We need to reject that silliness outright and re-engage with the natural process of the world, and see how the flesh is transmuted back into the soil, Like, I was talking about this with a couple of my friends on the Discord. One of the viewers here, Sheila, was actually a mortician, and we were talking about how, you can't even allow your body to be properly composted often in Western countries. We don't allow it. We would rather turn our bodies into poison and enshrine them in glass and stone and plastic, and then engage in this destruction of the earth, even in death, and this incredible hubris. How can we confront and overcome pain and suffering if we won't even look at it?
It's so true. I hadn't thought about that before. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So this next passage is related to the previous one. He says, the internet didn't exist in those days, and it took more than a decade before I stumbled upon an image that reminded me of my dream. The skeleton on a shining black globe, depicted in Johann Daniel Mylius's Philosophia Reformata, made me finally realize that what I had experienced on that Christmas night was something more universal than I thought.
The enigmatic engravings from Milius's book triggered a lifelong fascination with alchemy, and I was soon made aware that the Black Sun is associated with Saturn and the Negrido stage of the magnum opus. And there are only a few scholars who consider this to be more than merely a phase of the chemical process.
That
And
is.
this,
Go ahead.
sure, I was going to say something he points out elsewhere in the book as well is that we aren't supposed to just take this state of decay and move beyond it into something else. There's nothingness and this pain is inherent to existence, and it will always be there. It will always be there to inform us.
100%. And, you know, I just keep thinking, you know, from a religious studies academic background, someone who's engaged in a lot of this, he's so right. You do not see too many people fixating on the Black Sun and on the Negrido and on the Saturnian. You know, it is something that is, especially because of our, you know, the Christian sort of mindset that has been relegated to the background as one step along the journey rather than a journey unto itself. And, you know, I often think about a really great philosopher, even though they're a staunch materialist, you know, but they're still approaching a lot of this magical praxis is Georges Bataille. And Bataille talks about the solar anus, the black sun, and this production of the excess and the waste and the death, and that we have to overcome and we have to confront all of this ugliness. And you know, and so much of our material reality is defined by what we do and how we process excess, you know. And it's this, you can't have the sun without the black, you know. There's two sides of the same coin, and it's this fundamental reality that we refuse to engage with. I love it, you know. And it's also like, I think we've all experienced this too. I love that he found himself reflected in the work of the other, because this relates to what you said at the beginning of this story with finding his work, you know, and engaging with it in that way. It wasn't a dream image, but it was still this sharing of the experience. And so much of life is about that. We need to take our experiences and transform them into art. And it is through this artistic expression that we can contend with the world. And that is this magical process of transformation. And that is at the heart of this book. It's this sharing of experience. It's a confrontation. The book is the creation of an other, and it demands to be contended with. It demands that you engage with it and allow it to transform you.
Exactly. So next he says, what I find particularly relevant to this Saturnian path is that the material imagination of Western philosophers shows us what makes base matter become radiant. We cannot reduce alchemical allegories to simple meanings, but in my view, what shines in the great work is the pain they inflict again and again on poor matter. What we are dealing with is a metaphysics of suffering.
Wow.
So again, it's just about the pain and the transform, and using that as a transformation, and how each state of matter, each state that matter goes through has a process of decay as well into a new state. You know? And it's a constant degradation and pain that really perpetuates existence.
Yeah, we need to confront the painful, and we need to also look at our reality. There's a deep animism here, something that has been lost in modernity, but this recognition of the life force inherent within matter, and this understanding that through our hubris, we're constantly destroying and rebuilding and reshaping and creating, but this is a destructive process. It results in death. You know, when we build a home, you have to tear up the earth, you know, you got to tear down the tree to make the wood, but we're so disconnected from this process. We no longer even regard it as anything. You know, I often think, like in the Roman tradition, one of the highest priests was the Pontiff Maximus, and they were in charge of building the bridges, because you couldn't just build a bridge over water. To do that was to harm the natural environment. It was to block the flow. And so you needed a religious person to be involved in this process so that it could be done in a truly in a way with nature, but this is something that has been so lost. And we're not calling for a return to Roman tradition, but it is important we reflect upon these past ideas and see the inherent truth, this reality of the living, breathing nature that is around us. The matter is not dead, it is like if matter was dead, then how are we alive and conscious? Like in my conception, the consciousness, the reality, the life, it all comes from the matter itself, right?
Definitely.
I know this is a highly constented thing, but I can't see it any other way,
I share a similar view for sure. So this next passage is quite short, but it's my favorite passage in the entire work.
Oh. And
it inspired me to write much of The Flesh Not a Prison and Cruelty and Transformation, actually. Just the message that it conveyed to me. It says, there may or may not be a future for humanity as we know it, but either way, the time has come for us sorcerers to transform the pessimism of our world into a profound acknowledgement of history.
Oh, wow.
He says so little, such few words here.
Tell me what you think, man. Yeah.
So, again, he's talking about this potential future for us, and we might exist, we might persist, we might not. What matters is that we exist now, and we need to reinvite this sense of profound mystery into our lives in order to enrich ourselves, to overcome a lot of the pain that we're experiencing as a society, as a world as a whole, and to heal the world.
Yeah. This kind of thing is really so paramount to my own magical practice. It's this acknowledgement of the absurd, of the mystery, of the inability to rationally process and understand reality as we know it. Wisdom is a possibility, but true knowledge is denied to us in our current state because we are limited and bound by the matter in the bodies in which we live and persist. Our soul is not separate from the self, like in Artaud, right? We are forced to confront the absurd, the mystery. And it's when we face this mystery and we reaffirm ourselves against it and we challenge it and transmute the poison that persists from it, that we can truly engage with life in a radical, transformative, powerful way. So much of our life is about denying this absurdity. It's about refusing to admit our limitations. We want to lie to ourselves and say there is an absolute truth that we can perceive and understand. And in my conception, any truth can only be perceived for but a moment because nothing but flux is real, as Heraclitus would say. We have to truly accept this, and no more lying, no more fucking lying about it. Okay. There is no matter how long you sit and stare at the wall, you're not going to find some absolute truth. No matter how long you rewrite those sacred texts, they're not going to elucidate something greater, and no matter how much science we uncover, there will always be more mystery, and even if our science is able to contend with this with machine and computer, will we as individuals be able to contend with it, to be able to process it in a meaningful way? No. And we need to embrace this and understand, how do we engage with reality? The brain does through narrative, through art, through expression of experience. And we need to invite that myth making back and contend with this mystery, right?
Definitely.
Love it so much. You're right. This is something. This is the passage 21, people.
My arbitrarily numbered passage 21.
I know.
So I love this next passage too. He says, the challenge of Saturnian alchemy consists in undermining biopolitical power relations. Let us not forget that the alchemical texts often speak of poisoning the tyrannical king in order to restore him to new life. The subversive goal is to corrode the roots of our homocentric behavior and create new modes of being on planet Earth. Again, we are the planet. We are the universe. All is contained in all. Mystics of all traditions agree that this is the core wisdom of the world.
And then this is so true, right? Like we see these king rituals again and again and again. You know, in my other show that I do with my friend Dion, we talk a lot about the Semitic rites and a lot of the rites of the Middle East. And there is the rites associated with Melkart Heracles, which is the establishment of the king into the city. You know, and this would be a yearly process of death and rebirth where the king would be taken, shaved, and then applied with entheogenic oils, wrapped up like a mummy. And then he would be, this medicine would cause him to maintain an erection. And then the priestess would have sex with him. And this is where you would get your virgin births from, you know? And she would, after the sex was over, she would have to wake up the king. And this would be usually a violent attack. You know, we're shaking and beating, and even the use of the elusive alabastron magic wand on the anus to bring the antidote. You know, and often the king would not, if the king was not prepared and could not contend with the underworld, he was said to die. But if he did overcome these roots, what would happen is he would give birth to the virgin child who would become the next king, and you would reaffirm yourself for the next year in that throne. You know, this is something that's so primordial, and that's not the only tradition. We see this again and again and again.
Amazing.
Yeah. And you know, we need to confront this kind of stuff. We need to die die now so that we can live again in the future. You know, it's these accepting and understanding and confrontation with death. So much of our issue is, and why I think, you know, a person like Gast is so involved in the Saturnian magic, is because we have excised the Saturnian, the other. We have vilified it and made it other and reduced it to the mysterious underworld. And some of that is true to the system, but it's also this grandiose lie. You know, if you confront that other, you'll see it for what it is. And it is not what the religious forces and people tell you. It's, you know, it's something that needs to be perceived. But in this radical kind of absurdity, it can't be perceived, as Gast talks about with this blind dragon, you know?
Mm-hmm. So now we go back to Saturn, quite overtly. The mythological Saturn has appeared in many forms throughout the ages and across the world. In my book, he is an embodiment of the primordial otherness that God has violated and cast out of his master plan. Saturn is the damned beast whose horns of pain push us down into the groundless ground. When we look into the black-slitted pupil of his eye, we see the primal wound caused by the traumatic separation of light and darkness.
Wow. Yeah, well, Saturn is the one who separates. You know, he is that force, that destructive force, you know. And this is such a profound and powerful image that needs to be struggled with. You know, in that Saturnian image in the ancient Greek, it's such a multitudinous image, right? On one hand, it is Kronos, the tyrant, but it's also Kronos, the unending time, and it is also the Ananke, the feminine necessity that drive for desire, you know, that brings about this creation and this persistence into the now. And we have to engage with this image in its totality. You know, it is masculine, it is feminine, it is the serpent, it is all of these things and more. You know, it is that radical other that constantly challenges and is in that constant state of change.
Exactly. So now we come to some basic reflections on the images included in this book. And I love these passages because he really gets into what you're looking at in the images, as he says. So art is always autobiographical in one way or another. Yet never before has my work been so rooted in personal experience as the following images, which I present under the title Anarch. It is impossible to talk about them without elaborating on how they came into being and what state I was in when I created them. What you will discover in this book is a work that aims to connect with the forest of the Ardennes as a living theater, a theater of cruelty, to use Artaud's words. To get straight to the point, for some time now, I've been working from the perspective of someone who lives with constant pain. I have to find ways to deal with it, and my focus is not on optimistic healing practices. We have to come to terms with the fact that not everything can be fixed. This is true on both an individual and a universal level. Our cultural narratives fail us when they treat pain and suffering only as phases that must be overcome.
Wow. And I love that he's quoting Artaud because, as we've said, Artaud is sort of our quintessential magician dragon figure, you know, the one who does that alchemical transformation. And to see him acknowledge the theater of cruelty and see it for what it is, profound, you know. What do you think about all this?
I think that it's so true. So much of our pain doesn't go away. We learn to grow with it.
Yeah.
And our society is so ingrained on eliminating pain, curing, and sometimes things can't be cured. And that's a humbling experience to come across. And it's something that we need to recognize, because when we see pain as something to be cured or stamped away, or something that can be wished away by medical practices, etc., it really undervalues what the person is going through who is experiencing that pain.
That is so profound, because I know you personally, dealing with your personal mental health crises, this is a reality for you. This is not something that will ever be healed. This is who you are, and it's something that you have to contend with, and you have to utilize your faculty of reason and constantly overcome yourself, right?
Exactly. Schizoaffective disorder doesn't go away. It's there until I die, and I have to learn to live with it.
Yeah. And we all have to learn to live with pain, because pain is a part of reality, and there's this over medication, and there's this numbing, and there's this refusal to confront. And again, it's an illusion, and it's a lie, and it keeps us bound, and I'm not saying that we don't engage in medicine and other ways to deal and cope with pain, but at the same time, we have to confront its reality. As much as I have problems with Buddhism, the Buddha is right in that life is suffering, Life is suffering. To live is to suffer, but it's also to experience love. There's two sides to that coin, but that suffering needs to be faced. And we want to constantly live in the myth of love without the reverse, without the suffering, without that severity,
Exactly. So now he says, sorcery will not save us, but it allows us to take matters into our own hands. My practice is not aimed for an ideal future, but for creative survival in a chaotic world full of unease. I want my art to be like life itself, imperfect, messy, dirty, full of ambiguities and underlying violence.
Wow. Yeah, embracing the true reality, again, this constant theme of hiding from the violence, using creating mythical narratives, dumbing things down, protecting ourselves, vilifying and excluding and removing, rather than perceiving and embracing things for what they are, and recognizing how much violence in all of this stuff, these ambiguities, are so present in all action, in all life. You do not have life without violence. They're irreceptible, like just like we were saying about the in the previous slide, like these things are two sides of the same coin. They have to be contended with,
They do. And so this is an interesting passage where he's talking about some of the materials that he uses. He says, I also use digitalis, foxglove as it is called in English, along with soil from anthills and other substances that are best kept secret. Foxglove is poisonous and can be fatal even in small quantities if ingested. But as always with pharmaconic plants, there is a strong dialectic involved. The sculptures draw their magical power from the organic materials that work inside them, but also from the natural forces that act on them from the outside. Eventually, they will release it back into the earth as they fall apart and decompose. Even after they have merged with the forest, the alchemical sorcery that animates these objects continues to play an active role in the cycle of decay and regeneration.
That poison has to be there. There has to be there has to be a transmutation of this poison. When we look at all of these ancient mystery rites, at the heart of them is the theriac, right? And often, or similar things, the kykeon. But these, we in our modern times, we have a misunderstanding of these. These would contain things like henbane, datura, they would contain snake venoms, radical poisons that would require an antidote, usually in the form of an animal, right? At the heart of most of like the traditions that are related to the Proto-Indo-Aryan, you see the horse, and those of the Africans, you see the cow. In the Greek world, you see the goat and the lamb, but all of these can produce these antidotes. And it's this production of engaging with the natural world and utilizing our bodies and the life itself that we're able to transmute the poison into that powerful drug that grants the visionary experience, that brings the mania and the perception of Pan, that all.
Exactly. And I really like, this is just an example of alchemical sculpture in action, right? Like this is his practice that he's describing, and it's fascinating. And I love that he doesn't always say what all the ingredients are in his sorcery. There's always an element of mystery, and that's important. Something that is specific and personal to the caster.
100% agree.
So now he says, the black sun is a symbol of initiation that runs as a thread throughout the book. It gives form to that which defies understanding and can be related to the secret inner life of matter, but also to scientific mysteries of the universe, such as the great attractor, star-devouring black holes, dark energy, and so on. But of course, purely mythological or psychological interpretations are also possible. In any case, the black sun fires the imagination through the fusion of the life and death principles. The book lives from contagion, one image infecting another. If you look long enough and engage with it creatively, the images begin to act like notes in a composition. You start to hear the music when you bridge the gaps between the individual notes.
That's beautiful. It's that music only comes together in harmony, right? When it is perceived as a totality and it exists within time and change, right? It is to color time. Music is decorating time, and that's such a profound image there. I love it.
It is. It's just beautiful. The thought of thinking of sculpture and photography as music is just a really interesting concept. Like you said, there's the individual notes and you can think of the resonance, but then when you perceive them as a totality, it has this whole other profound effect.
Oh, for sure. And I was thinking too about what you were saying about that, but the artistic creation, and just this, we have to, we're so much, it has to be hidden because it can't be explained. And what I mean by this is it has to be experienced, right? Like, it has to be this creative production of the self and the self has to be brought into the mystery. You have to bring your own experience. And it's also this reality of anyone who's engaged with magic, even if you read the answer, doesn't matter. You won't understand it nor accept it until you have that experience of it. So if the magician gives it away, it does nothing to help you. It does not teach you anything.
It doesn't.
Wow. But yeah, this idea of all of these art coming together. And this is also, it makes me think too of, we perceive ourselves entirely as individuals, but our actions, our thoughts, our creations, our experiences, they have profound effects across time and space. They resonate within ourselves and within the universe and with others around us, and that act of sharing and exposing, by Gast creating this book, we're all here today. We're all engaging with this mystery and discussing it. It wouldn't happen without that creation, without that willingness to engage with the experience and share it in all of its raw, visceral realness.
Totally. Something, the most important element, I think, to the human condition is sharing our experience because we are connected.
Yeah, that's the purpose of life. Is we're experimental machines, I believe. And we're meant to experience and to share that experience and to continue forward in new experience infinitely. There's nothing else to it but that,
Exactly. So now we come to the second last text portion of the book. This is Only Chaos Sings the Truth. And here he really drives home what he was hinting at in the introduction. He says political correctness merely serves as an aesthetic correction that gives the monster a more humanitarian face, but leaves untouched the profound injustices that underlie the globalized art world. International exhibitions often try to give the impression that they are working for a fairer world. Behind the scenes, however, they become more and more entangled in the machinations of the states and corporations responsible for the injustices they publicly denounce. You can call it withdrawal if you like, but since moving to a remote rural area, I've been questioning my place in the world more thoroughly than my previous existence as a vagabond artist allowed me to.
I absolutely love this. And this is something that we need to contend with, because political correctness on one hand can be, there is a profoundness in being kind to other people and engaging with them on a personal level. But there's also a deep wrongness when this is conflated to the entirety of society, and when people's struggles are reduced. I often think of the George Carlin, and he brings up a perfect euphemistic example of this in one of his sets, where he goes, "Look at how we dealt with people who are suffering post PTSD. Okay, in World War I, this is shell shock. By World War II, it is battle fatigue. And then by the time you get to Korea, it is post-traumatic stress disorder, and it has become so disconnected that those who are suffering from it, we can no longer relate. We've hidden the violence through this euphemism and this desire to maintain this illusion of this perfected, beautiful reality. We deny people's lived experiences, and you often see this too with like minorities, like I like the word queer, and I will use that word, even though it is an othering and it is an attack, because it describes my experience. I have been othered and I have been attacked, and I choose to reclaim it for myself. And I don't want you to euphemize these things out of existence, And I mean, I do understand the profoundness in acknowledging everyone in the rainbow spectrum. I do want to do all of this, but at the same time, we can't allow this these political concerns to deny our realities. And you'll see this also with other minorities. Black Americans want to be called black, or people who have experienced, they want to be used in the languages and approached in the ways that they deem acceptable. We have this fear of engaging with the pain and the violence that our societies have caused, and people out of fear of hurting the other decide instead the best way is to hide. We create these these barriers. And again, it's an illusion. It's a misrepresentation. It's this process we often see too, like he's talking about art. Art often tries, you think, to change and challenge the world, but it winds up promoting just political ambition. And this is something that is so paramount and prevalent in modern society, especially if you go looking, right? Being in North America, we are fundamentally confronted with the image and the personage of Martin Luther King Jr. But this is someone who has been radically sanitized, you know, and transformed into this person who is, you know, all about maintaining the state and maintaining people's social cohesion, and nothing like the person that he was. All that made him radical and othering and challenging has been stricken, to the point where in our current Palestinian conflict, people are using his voice to justify violence, taking him out of context or talking about him only in one position, where it's almost certainly that someone like him would be calling for ceasefire, you know? Like, and the fact that people would dare to say otherwise shows you how far this whitewashing of these in this political correctness has taken us. And this is something we have to stand against, not in the personal, not in the individual. There's always a way to be kind and to treat others. But when we take that kindness and we use it to hide the visceral reality or to lie about our truth, then we're engaged in something far worse, you know?
Definitely. Truth, like virtue signaling. It's very insidious.
It's so insidious, you know, and as Canadians, we have the virtue signaler in chief. You know what I mean? Trudeau, who tries to do as little as possible and apologize to everyone. And all he does is upset everyone. You know?
Actuate the systems that are harming those people.
Exactly, right? Like what comes from him calling for a humanitarian ceasefire? What does that even mean? And why is that opposed to, what is that opposed to a regular ceasefire? You know, why does he hide behind this euphemism rather than face these difficult questions and engage with the reality? You can't have your cake and eat it too. You know, that gets you destroyed. And we all just witnessed as he was harassed by Palestinian activists at a restaurant for this ridiculousness. You know what I mean? And it's like, I know that these are difficult questions and we're going to get flack probably from engaging with the politics, but at the same time, show me the reality. Let's talk about what's actually going on. Show me the people. Don't allow these people to be reduced to subaltern, whether they're Jewish or Palestinian or what have you. And let us engage with all of these genocides, right? We're so much ignoring the ongoing wars that are happening all around us. And we just pretend. We hyperfixate on the ones that are good for us, that perpetuate a colonialist mindset, or that are, you know, happening in Europe, and we ignore when they happen in other places. It's end rant. I don't want to get any further, but no I had to get that off my chest. You know?
All good.
We need that radical equality that Gast has been talking about.
Exactly. Radical equality. So now we'll come to the last second. Oh, sorry, I'm jumping ahead of myself here. This last passage in this section really spoke to me as well. He says, my work alternates between brief moments of feverish heat and long periods of patient composure. Both parts are important. My intensifying focus on patience is one of the reasons why I have lately been referring to my art as alchemical sorcery rather than sorcery tout court. Sorcery is too often associated only with violent outbursts. In most cases, however, I achieve the best results when I act calmly, take my time to proceed. My experience has taught me that overly impulsive actions often ruin the work before it is completed. If we are patient, as the forest is patient, our art will grow and blossom into full strength. And you know, this is something that I have to remind myself and other friends who are artists as well, is that not engaging in art is part of the creative process. You need to live life, gain experiences, absorb new influences, and gain new insights into your condition, or else you'll just be creating stagnation.
Yeah, no, that's so profoundly true, and you have to experience life in all of its totality, even those moments of deep sadness. I think when we were talking about Charles Baudelaire, and he would have these incredible bouts of sadness and removal from society and rejection, but it's in those moments when you're removing and you're reflecting that the art is born. And even though he struggled with this inaction his whole life and was deeply self-critical, it it was in these moments that the profound revelations were revealed. you know and this is something that is hard to contend with, but it is something that as artists has to be contended. You have to face life and transmute it. You need to take that time to sit in the self, in silence and in solitude.
Exactly. And something else that this reminded me of is a quote by Artaud from The Theater and Its Double. And I've quoted this before, but it's just very profound and it resonated deeply with this passage, well, with me, with this passage, is that if our life lacks brimstone or a constant magic, it is because we choose to observe our acts and lose ourselves in their imagined form rather than being impelled by their force. It's so easy to hyper-analyze the work that you're doing and to think about the next project and what is it going to be and where is this project going, when really you just need to feel the power of creation and let that guide you a lot of the time.
There has to be, reason has its place, but we have to know when to abandon it and to let go and to trust that instinct, to trust the muse and to be guided, to allow that creation to unfold from that subconscious, that visceral self that can't be expressed, and that when you reason with it, you lessen it. If you can always overthink yourself into inaction. And this is something that we have to be careful of.
Absolutely.
The real creative, powerful artists who are someone who embrace that emotion and they take those outbursts and they channel them into creation, rather than if you sat there and were constantly just thinking and overthinking it, you could never get into that creative mode. You have to enter into those flow states, be possessed,
Absolutely.
I feel viscerally as a musician, like when I'm engaged in percussion, it's a letting go of the self. Getting to that point requires intense practice. But when the moment of production happens, it is completely without thought.
Yeah, it's like a whole other type of muscle memory, but with our
Or
intuition.
even like we're both poets and we understand this is writing poetry. There's those moments of visceral creation where I'll write something and then it's refined with reason after. But
Exactly.
I could not create those ideas in that reason state. They could not be expressed, though it does take reason to take it and to turn it into something cohesive, and it's this dote and antidote that's so necessary at all points of the alchemical process.
Totally. So this last section is called Forest, 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 until my blood contains all. And I didn't give you any material from this because it's just I'll read a few passages from it. It's a very fascinating diary meets poem. And what's interesting about this section is that all the writing becomes white text on black paper. And I should have asked them the meaning behind this aesthetic choice. I'm not quite sure what it's for, but it's quite striking. And so I'll read a few passages from it. The first day of the year is called the Word. On this day, which is not a word but a scream, the human lie is born. Great art leads us to the edge of failure. Sorcerous art takes us beyond it. The cut is deeper than it should have been, and the dripping blood forms a small puddle on the forest floor, where red wood ants scurry around their mound. In moments like these, I think of myself primarily as food. Noon on a Wednesday. I pull the loose bark off the spruce to take a close look at the winding tunnels of the beetle larvae. Their shapes form letters, and I can decipher names, but ours is not among them. And then this reflection I love. This is another passage that spoke deeply to me. Since his early death, my father has played an important role in countless of my dreams. Unjustly, he often appeared in them as an unreliable character who left my mother for no reason, or as an indifferent alcoholic or heroin addict, all things that had absolutely nothing to do with the reliable and caring character with which he was endowed with. But probably the most painful dream I had about him is the one in which I tried to summon him back to life. The memory of the dream begins the moment I see my father in a zombie-like stupor, surrounded by some of my ritual tools. I rub his face with fresh plant sap and implore him to wake up, but despite my persistent efforts, I fail to bring him fully to life. He stares silently into my eyes for what feels like an eternity, and it breaks my heart to see him in this state. Even during the dream, I am aware that I have broken a taboo. I am deeply ashamed and would do anything to let him rest in peace again.
Oh my gosh.
So powerful. Then
What do
he
you
says,
think about
hmm?
what do you think about that? Like, do you relate to that at all? Have you had dreams like this?
I haven't had dreams like this, but I do have a complicated relationship with my father, and it brought up a lot of interesting emotions and thoughts within me surrounding that, and how I would feel once he passes, and would I want to bring him back to life? What would I say if I brought him back to life? What would be the point of bringing him back to life? Maybe he has already lived what he needed to live, you know?
Right. It's death, especially, and of the parents are such deeply intense people in our lives. They're forced to provide us with the truth and protection, and oftentimes they don't even ask for this and have no understanding themselves. And even the best of parents, and I mean this with nothing but love and respect, cause trauma for their children. And this is just a result of reality. So we all have to contend with these very complicated, loving, and deeply troubling relationships in our lives. So much of ourselves too is about a projection. We see ourselves in our parents. We want to be the mother or the father. We want to embody them. We want to possess someone like them as our own partner. We want to do what's right by them. And oftentimes we're bound down by their dreams and their visions of who we are. So much of becoming the self, like in my own experience, was about challenging their perception, and inserting my own, and learning that was okay, and that I don't have to do what they did or what they want. And it's not like I don't have a loving relationship with my parents. This was just something that needs to happen for all of us, I think.
Definitely, like I love my parents. I think they tried really hard to give us an enriching childhood and upbringing. But like you said, we cause damage just by living.
Yeah. I think about, God, there's this really cool show. I can't remember what it's called now. It's like a cartoon on Netflix. They have a whole episode on the tarot and whatnot. I'll try to remember it. But there was this one moment where the character, it's really a podcast that's been animated. And the main character is talking to his mother. It's like Pendleton, that guy Pendleton. Yeah.
I've seen this. It's called the Holy. No. I know what you mean. I've seen this show.
Yeah. It's phenomenal. But there's one point where he's talking to his mother, who's a psychologist, and she talks about how the very simple act of her giving birth to her second child was beyond problematic and traumatic for her son, and there was nothing that she could do. Right? This is about just the reality of life, and she's desperately trying to balance these two living beings and their different needs, and that very act of balancing causes pain. It's like, to be a parent is it's such a difficult task, and I have nothing but love and respect for anyone who attempts it. But yeah,
definitely,
life is traumatic.
It's traumatic. So I'll leave this section with two more little quips or passages. He says the opposition for Saturn is at 5 p.m. today. Yes, the point is to get out. But these days, the only way for me is in, i.e., a distant place within. And lastly, the section ends with simply the question, what is an end?
Wow. What is an end?
What is an end? And from here, it transitions into 100 pages of stunning photography of his artwork.
Oh, wow. I'm just thinking now on this concept of an end. Like, is sleep an end? Is death an end? You know?
There is no end. There's only different states of being, right?
Yeah, right. So what does it even mean that we say these words, right? And how do we even confront with those moments, of where something does end and is transformed, or is in the process of transformation or decaying, and we're so viscerally repulsed, like so much of death is that stink, it's that rot, it's that decay, and this repulses us. How do we engage with it? Yeah. Wow. So now we're going to go into the art section, right?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So we'll bring up.
Bear in mind, these are pictures I've taken of pictures from the book. So the quality is much more rich and entrancing in real life when you look at these pictures.
We highly recommend that you purchase this book. This is one of the best occult and art books that we've seen maybe ever. This is a profound artistic moment in time and place that's truly representative of the now, and it needs to be engaged with, and it will transform you if you give it the time and place that it demands. So this is a preview. Respect the artists. Go at least to their website and read and support them, please. We've shown a lot of their work, and they were kind enough to allow us to present this presentation. So all the love and respect to Gast Bouschet. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Oh wow.
So he often has these figures of like the horned figure is a prominent imagery throughout much of the work.
The horned figure is such a primordial human figure. You see this so cross-culturally everywhere. That man of the woods, the child of the great mother, right? That Dionysus, that Shiva, right? Or the Pashupati, right? The Lord of Beasts, the Green Man, or even the figure of Moses in Judaism has horns in the early texts. And this is something that goes back to this primordial past to which we are all connected. What do you think about these roses or these flowers?
What do I think about them? I like that they're black or dark in shade. It's sort of like, are they alive? Are they dead? Are they in a state of transition?
I don't know why, and I'm probably reading into this, but that's the beauty of art. But to me, I see both this decaying death of the flower, but also the faint corrupted image of the Kabbalic tree of life that has been broken. The pathways no longer connect, and the Sephiroth are out of place.
Wow. So this image I found was just so striking. It's is that animal remains? Is that, we're not really sure. There's no description offered for any of these artworks. So you're left to interpret it yourself, reflect on it, and feel the impact of its image.
Even if it's not a living being, it is something that has decayed in such a way that it resembles the bone in the flesh, and it's going through that same process.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. And then the new growth, the roots that are overtaking it, that'll consume it, and And then that this blackness in the earth here, right? This is in the spring, this will be green. And this will give rise to so much life, grass and mushrooms. This is just a moment in time. Wow.
Exactly. So he has implied in Anarch that he sometimes uses his own blood in his works. I'm not sure if that's what he used to color this or if he used the dye from a plant. I'm not really sure to get this red hue.
He did talk a lot about the soils as well, the ant dirt and such. So, but either way, this is profound, right? Another horned image, bird. I wonder if this is a carrion bird. It seems to be carved into the very bark of a tree.
It almost reminds me a bit of a draconic sort of figure as well.
Yes, right. Back to this theme of these blind dragons, that is so essential to this work, and this confrontation with that beast, this primordial other that can't be perceived. But demands to be perceived, right? So the very act of trying to create it, you create something different, but it is in that process of creation that newness comes about. It's beautiful.
And this seems to be a triptych of sorts. I'm not quite sure what the message is, but it's very striking. Very striking to me. It reminds me of the rot, but also in the middle passage, it seems like there's growth above the rot. And then the third passage, almost the third piece, almost looks like the root structure, maybe of the tree.
I think it's hard to say, but I get this visceral feeling that it's from the decay that you get this new life, and this life is a duality. You have that which extends upwards into the sky, but it also extends downwards into the earth. There is a duality to this life and to the tree, right? Back again to this Kabbalistic image of the tree of life that is so predominant in a lot of occult philosophy and in a lot of paganism, such as in the Norse mythology, or with Dionysus, who is the god of the tree, Dionysus. So, and then it looks like there are mushrooms, right?
Yeah.
Mushrooms feed upon the decay. They transmute and they recreate that soil that can feed and empowers the forest. They're the lifeblood and the voice of the trees.
Exactly. And this is so he often writes these texts. I don't know if they're sorcerer's practice, if they're diary reflections, but he does things with them. He'll bury them or subject them to varying states of punishment and transformation.
This is something we see often in the magical processes, right? Where you're supposed to, you see this in chaos magic with sigil creation, where the sigil is either forgotten or destroyed or abandoned. Or you see this in many traditions where your prayers are offered up into the sacred fire that reclaims it and sends it to the spiritual realm. But there has to be this destruction. There has to be this reincorporation into the matter, where your ideas transcend what they were and be in return back to the source. So that's a very profound alchemical Negrido action there. I love it.
And this I thought was important because it shows some of the wilderness. There's the ruined shed, but you see the trees in the background and the hills. And it really exemplifies an otherness, this other world that you venture into when you enter this forest, It is a primordial world that you're a part of now.
The human is so, in the face of the great forests, the human in our constructions are so short and are so limited. And if we do not persist upon them, they are reclaimed. Like, this is something I know all too well. Like, I have friends who have cottages up in the high woods here. And every year they go out and it's this massive reclamation effort because it had been abandoned over the winter for long periods and nature would consume it. And if you were to leave that for even a year or two, it would be gone. It'd become a home for bears or raccoons, and trees would grow through it, and there would only be the barest image of humanity there. I remember seeing a while ago, I'm not sure how true it was because it is on on History Television, but there was a show where they were talking about how much of our stuff would persist, how much of humanity would persist. And most of what we think would persist would not. All of our cities, all of our roads, all of that would rust and decay and be destroyed. It is things like and Gast has talked about this in the work, things like our nuclear destructive elements that will persist for long periods. Our monuments will decay and be reclaimed.
This is the iconic picture that we used.
I thought it was perfect. It's kind of funny because you told me that you had been in contact with Gast because we wanted to make sure that he would be okay with such an incredible deep dive of such a new work and something that is so personal and needs to be purchased and needs to be seen in person. And he was so kind to allow us this. And he saw the image that we chose for the cover, and he thought that it was awesome that you had this duality of the horned mask and the dragon. And I did intend for that because at first I was looking for a picture of him, but then none of them really fit the aspect ratio And then I saw this and I went, wait, he's a dragon here. He's wearing the dragon mask. He's confronting that dragon figure, that blind dragon, and is being transformed by it. We need to show him in this form, so it was perfect. And this is a lovely image, with the roots and the wand and him on the throne with the mask of the dragon. Those with ears to hear understand that he's reconstituting that primordial personage, and he's going to battle and becoming the dragon reborn. Love it. Transmuting that poison.
Mm-hmm. This was a very striking image to me. It evokes a lot of emotions that I don't really know how to convey into words, but it does bring to mind the concept of his statues that he builds and then buries in the earth and leaves them there. And this reminds me of that. But it also reminds me of maybe returning to the earth and in a state of death, perhaps. And maybe there's connection there. I'm not really sure. But it also seems like a larval state as well.
It's clear. Yeah, it's both, I think, right? It's on one hand, it is that decay into the earth, but it's this larva. I like the idea the body is kind of rising up. It's getting ready to come out of this depth in some ways, or this is something to be struggled with and to be meditated upon. There's a lot of possibility here. With all of this kind of magical art, there's always dualities to these images. In the decay and in the death, there is new life. We must never forget.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
This is one of his sculptures that he built from various, I'm assuming, organic and inorganic materials, and left, I believe, to allow nature to start to reclaim it. And he's photographed it not as it was initially built, but as a stage in his degradation process, to really show the filthiness of alchemy, the ugliness. Yeah.
There needs to be that ugliness, that rot, before there can be that rebirth of life. The mushrooms grow in the shit, but you need that effluence, that there has to be a breaking down to its constituent parts and a reformation. That matter needs to be able to be transmuted and transformed, and it can't do that if it is still whole.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love it. And this is such a striking and scary image, but it is also one, like, I love that he has given us all this philosophy before we approach this image, because to just see this, it would cause a visceral response. But we have been primed to accept this in such a different way you know, and now we can see it through the eyes of the Negrido Alchemist, and we can see the beauty in the decay.
Exactly. Even within rot, there was life, you know?
Yeah.
I believe, is this the last image? I think so.
Yeah, this is our last image.
Very striking. You know, we have the black sun, you know?
Yeah. That profoundly Saturnian image of the black sun, that which consumes us all, the black hole, you know, that destructive force of you know, like Bataille talks about with that the solar anus, that just the so much expenditure, so much waste, this production of too much, and how do we deal? And I look at this and I also am immediately confronted with this possibility of the mushroom cloud, of the nuclear bomb. You know, it's looming over the horizon and it is engulfing the life. But as Gast said in the beginning of that article we read on Goetia, it is through the fall of these empires and through this destruction that we can perceive and come and reform. There is this potential, you know, for transformation, but there has to be this destructive force.
Absolutely. From the darkness is a womb and also a tomb.
Yeah, it is the cave. It is the coffin, and yeah, it is the womb. What a profound image to end on. Wow, Graham. Almost 2 hours, almost 3 hours here. Just coming up to the 3-hour mark.
Fun for staying in tune with us.
Yeah, so we really appreciate all you who stuck it out and really embraced Gast and his work. As you can see, this was something that was truly worth engaging with. And again, please, if you go to the description, you'll see Gast's links below to his personal page where he has his biography and has his writings. You will also find the link to Scarlet Imprint, his publisher, and you can purchase this book. With that being said, Graham, what do you want to leave us on? What are your thoughts now that we've gone through this confrontational process and we've experienced this?
Now that we've experienced this profound work, I want to really hit home, I guess, the idea that magic is not something in the past. It is something we can bring to the present, something that we can personalize. And we need to have a unique approach to magic, or else it will not be sincere.
You know, that's something that I really want to echo, because like we had said and we discussed at the beginning, so much of like modern alchemy and magic, it's like step-by-step instructions. And it's all relegated to these texts of the past. And there is something to be learned there, but the true magician takes these and adds their muse to it. Uses that creative power to take these ideas and transform the self. You have to engage with that other on a visceral level. And these myths and these methods can help you reach there. But if you want to truly do something meaningful, it has to come from the self. You know, as above, so below. We want your experience, your perspective. Everyone is beautiful. Everyone has something to offer. And that's what magic is about. It's about confronting the challenges of life, experiencing as much as possible, and translating it into artistic expression.
Well said.
No more of this magic of the grandiose self, of this will or the usurping of others' will. This is about transforming the entirety of the world and the self, and to engage back with nature, you know, to reclaim what was lost, but to bring it into the future, you know, to not be bound by the past or the present, and to not exist in this lawfulness, but to embrace the mystery, as Gast said, right?
Exactly.
So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We have absolutely loved this experience. And we have, if you go to the links below, we have a coffee where you can donate to us. We have a Patreon where you can support our channel. Every little bit helps. We do all of this in our spare time, and we would love to be able to produce more and more magical content for you. And if you support us, more of this will come. So please, also, Graham is a writer, a publisher. He has his own publication house called Things in My Chest. He recently just released 2 brand new books that you had mentioned here that were largely inspired by this work. So take a minute and talk about that, please.
Sure. So the first one is The Flesh is Not a Prison, which I released in May. And it very much is about, it's about survival, and it's about my own personal struggles, but it's also about the need to embrace mysticism and post-humanism in order to enrich our lives.
Yeah. And if you want, we have a deep dive where Graham and I have gone through quite a few of his works on this channel. We specifically talk about that particular book. And Graham also has a bunch of music as well with his band, Ghosts of Shadow Moses. So please go support us on all of our socials, share this. And if you like this video, if you liked Gast's work, buy the book and tell him that we sent you. Okay? And I'll end you with this. Peace, love, hail Satan. Until next time, take care.
And I wondered who his master could be, and I pressed my eye eagerly to the grave. And I wondered who his master could be, and I pressed my eye eagerly to the grave. And I wondered who his master could be, and I pressed my eye eagerly to the grave. And I wondered who his master could be, and I pressed my eye eagerly to the grave. And I wondered who his master could be, and I pressed my eye eagerly to the grave. And I wondered who his master could be,